Hey guys, today we're going on a rather ambitious journey. One that takes us back further than any selfie stick could reach, into the primordial ooze of human consciousness. Imagine, if you will, the world before alarm clocks, before smartwatches chirped their insistent demands, before even a single tick-tock echoed in the vast, silent stretches of prehistory. You're standing, barefooted and a little grubby, under an impossibly vast sky. The air around you hums with the primal symphony of crickets, the rustle of unseen creatures, and the distant murmur of a river. There are no schedules, no deadlines, just the relentless, beautiful, and utterly indifferent march of cosmic events. You're entirely dependent on the sun's gentle nudge to wake you, the moon's silvery glow to guide your nocturnal hunts, and the rhythmic ebb and flow of seasons to tell you when to gather berries or migrate with the herds. In this world, the idea of a Monday or a Friday would be as alien as a smartphone. And honestly, if you tried to explain it, you probably wouldn't survive the next full moon cycle. Your tribe would likely decide you'd been bitten by a particularly confused insect and leave you to your strange musings. No, back then, time wasn't a linear progression of neatly divided hours and days. It was a feeling, a deep-seated intuition tied directly to the pulse of the planet. You lived by the sun's arc, a silent, blazing conductor orchestrating your waking hours. You stretched your stiff limbs as the first sliver of dawn painted the horizon, its pale light seeping into your makeshift shelter. You spent your days foraging, hunting, crafting rudimentary tools, your muscles aching with the effort, your mind focused solely on the immediate task. Survival, the warmth on your skin, the lengthening shadows, the gradual descent of the sun, these were your clock hands, moving with an ancient, unquestionable authority. As dusk deepened, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, you'd gather around a crackling fire, sharing tailies, mending nets, or simply staring into the hypnotic dance of the flames. This wasn't leisure, not in our modern sense. It was a necessary pause, a collective unwinding before the night enveloped you. And what a night it was! Not the light-polluted, gentle dim of our urban sprawl, but a true, inky blackness, punctuated only by the astonishing brilliance of a million distant suns. You'd lie there, wrapped in animal hides, feeling the chilling bite of the night air, listening to the guttural calls of unseen predators, and perhaps watching the moon perform its slow, majestic ballet across the sky. The moon, with its waxing and waning phases, was arguably humanity's first reliable calendar. Each transformation, from slender crescent to full, luminous orb and back again, marked a distinct period. You'd learn to associate the full moon with certain hunting opportunities, or perhaps with the ripening of specific fruits. You knew, instinctively, that roughly every 29 or 30 sunrises, the moon would complete its cycle, presenting a fresh face to the world. This lunar rhythm was a vital guide, far more immediate and practical than the more subtle shifts of the stars. The stars, however, held their own profound mysteries and practical applications. As the seasons turned, so too did the constellations, tracing slow, predictable paths across the celestial dome. You'd notice how certain star patterns appeared only in the cold months, signaling the approach of winter and the need to prepare for scarcity. Others heralded the return of warmth, the blossoming of new life, and the abundance of spring. Imagine an elder, perhaps a shaman, pointing to a familiar cluster of stars, explaining how their position foretold the migration of the mammoths or the arrival of the salmon run. This wasn't just mystical mumbo-jumbo. It was survival knowledge passed down through generations, etched into the collective memory of the tribe. Mainstream historical fact time. Many ancient cultures, from the constructors of Stonehenge to the indigenous peoples of the Americas, demonstrably aligned their megalithic structures and ceremonial sites with the solstices and equinoxes, showing a sophisticated understanding of the sun's annual journey. They weren't just guessing. They were measuring, observing, and building monuments that acted as colossal, immovable calendars. It's tempting to think of these early humans as simple, their lives dictated solely by instinct. But you, the modern human, with your smart devices and digital planners, would be utterly lost in their world. They possessed an acute awareness of their environment, a deep connection to the natural world that we've largely severed. Their understanding of time was holistic, interwoven with the very fabric of existence. Every rustle in the leaves, every cloud formation, every subtle change in the air pressure was a signal, a piece of information that contributed to their temporal awareness. And yes, sometimes, perhaps after a particularly potent fermented berry concoction, they might have pondered the deeper meaning of it all, wondering if the stars were truly distant fires or the eyes of ancient gods. Now for a quirky tidbit. While most early timekeeping focused on astronomical observations, some fringe theories suggest that certain ancient communities, particularly those living near volcanic activity, might have used the unpredictable but rhythmic rumblings of the Earth itself as a form of temporal marker, linking eruptions or seismic shifts to longer cycles of time, or perhaps even as omens for events. Imagine a schedule dictated by molten rock. Oh, is it time for the weekly lava flow yet? I need to remember to move the goats. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for early timekeeping was purely pragmatic aiding in hunting, gathering, and agriculture, or if there was a deeper, spiritual impulse, a desire to align human existence with the perceived divine order of the cosmos. Was it about knowing when to plant, or about pleasing the sky gods? Perhaps both, because in a world where survival hung by a thread, every piece of knowledge, every perceived connection to the rhythms of the universe was a profound advantage. You're observing the world, not just living in it, feeling the cosmic rhythms beat in your very bones, long before anyone ever thought to invent a Tuesday. You're standing on sun-baked earth, the dust still clinging to your sandals from whatever ancient errand you were just running, maybe chasing a particularly mischievous goat, or perhaps just attempting to decipher a particularly confusing tax bill carved into clay. Above you, the Mesopotamian sky stretches out, an inky velvet canopy studded with diamonds you can almost pluck. There's no light pollution here, no glowing orange haze from a distant city, just the raw, undiluted majesty of the cosmos, so bright it almost hurts your eyes, even as it beckons them upwards. You trace the familiar paths of the wandering stars, those celestial shepherds herding their silent flocks across the infinite pasture of night. It's a primal scene, isn't it? One that probably, if we're being honest, wouldn't last long for you if you actually had to rely on your gut instinct and the vagaries of the moon to avoid, say, accidentally stepping on a scorpion in the dark. Without their insights, you'd probably still be telling time by how many times you've stubbed your toe on a moonless night. And frankly, you probably wouldn't survive this if you relied on that. This isn't just about feeling small under a big sky anymore, like we talked about last time, watching ancient humans squint at the sun. This is where things get truly organized, where that primal awe solidifies into something tangible, something that starts to look suspiciously like a calendar. You see, while early humans were certainly aware of the moon's cycles and the sun's daily journey, it was in the Fertile Crescent, among the ancient Babylonians that things really clicked into place. They weren't just observing, they were obsessed. And bless their clay tablet scribbling hearts, they were good at it. You can almost hear the scratch of stylus on wet clay as they meticulously charted the movements of the heavens, not just for fun, mind you, but because the heavens, to them, were the gods. Imagine them, these ancient stargazers, perched atop their towering ziggurats, peering through the pristine night air. No fancy telescopes, just incredibly sharp eyesight and an almost uncanny patience. They identified 7 major celestial bodies that were visible to the naked eye, those luminous wanderers distinct from the fixed stars. The sun, the moon, and what we now know as Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. To them, these weren't just balls of gas and rock. They were powerful deities, each exerting its own influence over the world below. And what better way to honor and predict the will of these cosmic overlords than to dedicate a specific segment of time to each one? This is where our modern week truly begins to take shape. The Babylonians linked each of these 7 celestial bodies to a specific day, creating a cycle of 7 days. It made sense to them deeply, intrinsically. The number 7 itself held immense significance in Babylonian cosmology, not just because of the visible planets, but also possibly reflecting the approximate number of days in each quarter of the lunar cycle. You'd find them meticulously planning their lives around this system. Today is a moon day, perhaps good for introspection or certain agricultural tasks. Tomorrow is a Mars day, maybe best for military endeavors or, arguing with your neighbor about that wayward goat. It was a cosmic schedule, and everyone was expected to stick to it. Trying to explain the concept of a long weekend to them would probably just result in a blank stare and a lecture about planetary alignments. Here's a quirky little tidbit. They had specific days considered profoundly unlucky. For instance, the 7th, 14th, 19th, 21st, and 28th days of certain months were particularly ominous designated evil days, where specific actions were forbidden, especially for the king, who might avoid eating cooked food or changing his clothes. It's like their version of a cosmic Monday, but way more serious, with actual divine consequences if you messed up. You can practically hear the ancient astrologer whispering, "Don't even think about signing that contract today, my lord. Saturn's looking grumpy." Now, a mainstream historical fact that can't be understated. The Babylonian observation of these 7 celestial bodies and their direct association with a 7-day cycle is widely acknowledged as the foundational blueprint for the week as we know it today. While the specific names of the days might have morphed over millennia as different cultures adopted and adapted the system, from Babylonian gods to Roman deities to Norse mythology, the core structure, that unwavering septenary rhythm, remained. It was a truly ingenious system, providing a framework for organizing time beyond the simple lunar month or solar year. It offered a middle ground, a more manageable chunk of time for planning, for ritual, for just existing. Historians still argue whether their primary motivation was purely scientific observation, aimed at predicting celestial events, or if the astrological significance, the belief that the movements of these celestial bodies influenced human destiny, drove the system more profoundly. Was it about knowing when the next eclipse would occur, or when to best appease the god of war? Perhaps it was a delicious blend of both, a cosmic casserole where superstition seasoned the scientific method. You can imagine a Babylonian astronomer priest scratching his beard, muttering about planetary conjunctions and how it's going to be a rough day for goat herders. This wasn't just some abstract intellectual exercise for them. This was deeply practical. You needed to know when to plant, when to harvest, when to perform specific religious rites. This 7-day cycle provided a regular, predictable rhythm to their lives, moving beyond the chaotic ebb and flow of just the moon or the sun. It was like they finally got their first daily planner, except instead of dentist appointment at 3 p.m., it was don't annoy the god of war on Mars's day, or your crops will perish. Slightly higher stakes, you'd agree. They charted these movements with incredible precision for their time, creating intricate ephemerides tables predicting the positions of the celestial bodies. They weren't just naming days. They were creating a system of cosmic order, a reflection of the divine will etched in the stars. And as empires rose and fell, as cultures mingled and collided, this revolutionary idea, this 7-day revelation, would spread like wildfire. It journeyed from Mesopotamia to the wider Near East, influencing cultures from the Hebrews to the Egyptians, before eventually making its way to the Greeks and Romans, who, as we'll soon see, really put their own stamp on things. But the seed, that fundamental idea of a 7-day cycle linked to the visible planets, that was all thanks to the stargazers of Babylon, quietly charting their destiny under an impossibly bright sky. They truly laid the groundwork, brick by astronomical brick. You stand on the sun-baked banks of the Nile, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming papyrus. The river, a swirling ribbon of liquid life, stretches before you, an ancient artery pulsing with the very rhythm of existence. You feel the fine silt between your toes, hear the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of reeds in the gentle breeze. Overhead, the relentless Egyptian sun bakes down, painting the sky a fierce, uncompromising blue. This isn't just a river. It's the heartbeat of a civilization, the grand conductor of a meticulously orchestrated life, and the ultimate timekeeper. Remember how you were just gazing up at those distant stars with our early human friends, trying to make sense of the cosmos, or how the Babylonians started clocking those 7 celestial wanderers for their week. Well, here in ancient Egypt, the cosmic dance takes a slightly different, infinitely more practical turn. Your entire world, from the food you eat to the gods you worship, hinges on one monumental, predictable event, the annual flooding of the Nile. Without it, you're just a very thirsty, very hungry person in a vast desert. And let's be honest, in this era, you probably wouldn't survive a single season without that life-giving inundation. The Egyptians, bless their ingenious hearts, quickly cottoned onto this. Their lives weren't just influenced by the Nile, they were literally dictated by it. You learn to read the river, not just the sky. You watch as the waters swell, turning the parched land into a fertile, muddy paradise. This cyclical phenomenon became their first, most reliable calendar. Forget your fancy digital watches. Here, time is measured in the rise and fall of water. Their genius wasn't just in observing, but in systematizing. They noticed that a particular star, Sirius, which they called Soptit, would make its heliacal rising. That's when it becomes visible just before the sun at dawn, right around the time the Nile's annual flood began. It was a cosmic alarm clock, perfectly timed with their earthly necessity. This observation, sharp as a newly chipped flint, allowed them to calculate a year of roughly 365 days. Roughly being the operative word, of course. They weren't exactly rocking atomic clocks down by the pyramids. This fundamental understanding, tying celestial events to terrestrial cycles, became the mainstream historical fact that underpinned their entire chronological system. They didn't just stumble upon it. They meticulously tracked it, year after year, with a dedication that would make a modern-day spreadsheet enthusiast weep with joy. Their calendar wasn't built around a 7-day week like Babylon's. Oh no, the Egyptians had a grander, more agricultural vision. Their year was divided into 3 distinct seasons, each directly tied to the Nile cycle. Akhit, the inundation, when the floodwaters covered the land. Perit, the growth, when the waters receded and crops were planted. And Shemu, the harvest, when the crops were reaped and the land dried out again. Each of these seasons consisted of 4 months, and each month, in turn, had precisely 30 days. Do the math, and you'll find that 12 months times 30 days equals 360 days. Now you might be thinking, hold on, that's 5 days short of a full year. And you'd be absolutely right. This is where things get delightfully quirky. The ancient Egyptians, ever practical and deeply religious, added 5 extra days to the end of their year. These weren't just any days. They were the epagomenal days, sometimes called the 5 days upon the year. They were considered unlucky for starting new projects, but crucially, they were dedicated to the birthdays of 5 powerful deities: Osiris, Horus, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys. Imagine celebrating 5 consecutive divine birthdays at the end of every year. It was like a perpetual holiday season, except instead of mince pies, you probably had a lot of rituals and offerings. This is our quirky tidbit, a calendrical fudge factor steeped in divine intervention. Historians still argue whether the initial observation of Sirius led directly to the 365-day calendar, or if the epagomenal days were a later refinement to align their civil calendar with the actual solar year. So, while the Babylonians were busy naming their days after the visible planets and sun-moon, the Egyptians were dividing their time into grander, agricultural chunks. Their days were more about sequential position within a month or season rather than a named cycle like Monday or Tuesday. You might be told, today is the 3rd day of the 2nd month of Perit, rather than Happy Wednesday. It's a very different approach to day divisions, heavily influenced by their environmental realities. They didn't have alarm clocks, but they did have ingenious ways of tracking the passage of a day and night. For daylight, you'd use a sundial, though its accuracy would vary with the seasons and the sun's position in the sky. It's not like you could set it for a precise 8 a.m. meeting. At night, when the sundial was useless, unless you had a really bright moon and a vivid imagination, they relied on water clocks or clepsydra. These were ingenious devices, essentially pots with a small hole in the bottom, allowing water to drip out at a steady rate. Markers on the inside would indicate the passage of hours. Of course, the challenge was keeping the water flow perfectly consistent, especially as the water level dropped. If you were really fancy, you might have one shaped like a baboon, which would make the passage of time feel a little less like a chore and a little more like performance art. Oh, look, the baboon just burped out another hour. The Egyptian calendar, with its 365 days and 3 main seasons, became a cornerstone of their civilization, meticulously regulating farming, religious festivals, and even governmental administration. It wasn't about a specific day's name, but about the reliable, cyclical progression of life itself, driven by the magnificent, life-giving Nile. And this consistent rhythm, though different from the Babylonian system, was another crucial step in humanity's slow, deliberate march towards the named, numbered days we take for granted today. They laid the groundwork for managing time on a large, annual scale, perfecting a system that would echo through millennia, long after the last floodwaters receded. You're leaning back now, perhaps your head against a cool stone, The desert wind, if we're still playing pretend, just whispering past your ears. The sun, a molten orange disk, dips below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks of crimson and gold. But this isn't just another sunset. No, this one hums with a different kind of energy, a slow, building anticipation that wraps around you like a warm blanket. You feel it in the air, a collective sigh of relief, a communal downshift. Because for a people who, for millennia, have measured their lives not just by the rise and fall of celestial bodies, but by a profound, divinely ordained rhythm, this particular sunset signals something truly special. Remember how we talked about those cosmic rhythms, how early humans peered at the heavens, trying to make sense of the vast, indifferent clockwork above. And then Babylon, with its impressive stargazing, assigning meaning and names to days based on planetary gods. Or Egypt, tying its very existence to the life-giving surge of the Nile. Well, now, you're stepping into a different kind of timekeeping, one where the week isn't merely a practical construct, a human invention to organize markets or harvests. Here, the week is a spiritual journey, a deliberate echo of creation itself, culminating in a day of unparalleled holiness, the Sabbath. Imagine, if you will, the 6 days that precede it. You're toiling, you're working the fields, perhaps tending to your flock under the relentless sun. Every day is a grind, a struggle for sustenance, a constant negotiation with a harsh, unforgiving world. You're building, sowing, gathering, mending. Your hands are calloused, your back aches. Your mind is a constant whirl of tasks undone and mouths to feed. And then, as the sun begins its descent on the 6th day, a different kind of energy starts to ripple through the camp, through the village. A quiet transformation. Tools are laid down. Fires, if they're to be lit, are lit early. Because when the first 3 stars twinkle into existence in the twilight sky, an invisible, sacred boundary is crossed. This isn't just about taking a break. You know, like how you might, if you're lucky, get a weekend these days to binge-watch something or attempt that ever-elusive hygge vibe. No, this is an enforced, celebrated cessation of all productive activity. It's a complete spiritual pivot. You're not just resting from work, you're entering into a state of holiness. Think about it. If you were in ancient times, especially amongst this particular tribe, and you somehow managed to accidentally, say, tie a loose knot in a rope after sundown on Friday, you'd be in a bit of a pickle. A serious pickle. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive that kind of pickle. The strictures surrounding the Sabbath were, to put it mildly, comprehensive. This profound concept, the idea that 1 day out of 7 is fundamentally different, set apart, holy, is a cornerstone of Hebrew timekeeping. It's rooted in the very fabric of their foundational texts, specifically in the command to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. This isn't just some historical factoid you skimmed in a textbook. It's a living, breathing commandment, a covenant, a central pillar of their identity. While other cultures might have had their market days or auspicious lunar cycles, the Hebrew Sabbath was something else entirely. A weekly reminder of divine creation, liberation from slavery, and a foretaste of a world at peace. It was revolutionary, really. Imagine telling a pharaoh, "Yeah, about that monumental pyramid you want built. My people are taking Saturday off, for God." You can practically hear the collective gasp. Now, here's a quirky tidbit to chew on as you drift off. The prohibitions on the Sabbath weren't just about not working. They extended to 39 specific categories of forbidden activity, derived from the tasks involved in building the tabernacle in the wilderness. So it wasn't just no farming. It was no plowing, no sowing, no reaping, no binding sheaves. all the way down to no writing 2 letters, no building, no extinguishing a fire. So, if you suddenly realized you left your ancient equivalent of a phone charger across the room on the Sabbath, you couldn't just get up and fetch it if it involved carrying an object from a private domain to a public domain, or vice versa. Good luck with that. You'd probably just have to do without, which, let's be honest, is a form of self-control most of us modern folk probably haven't experienced since our internet went down for a day. Historians still argue whether the concept of a 7-day week, specifically culminating in a day of rest, originated solely and entirely within the Hebrew tradition, or if there were earlier, perhaps Mesopotamian, influences that gradually coalesced into this unique spiritual practice. Was it an independent revelation, a direct divine instruction, or did elements of pre-existing calendrical practices, perhaps even those unfavorable, evil days from Babylonian astrology we touched on, get reinterpreted and sanctified? The truth is, the distinctive spiritual meaning woven into the Hebrew Sabbath elevates it far beyond a mere cyclical division of time. It wasn't about appeasing capricious gods or predicting floods. It was about connecting to the divine, about purposeful cessation, about creating sacred time in a secular world. It was about defining a people, giving them a rhythm that set them apart, a weekly pulse of holiness. This sacred rhythm would prove incredibly resilient, enduring through millennia, even as empires rose and fell, and calendars shifted like desert sands. The Mediterranean sun, a relentless golden eye, beats down on the marble steps of the Stoa Poikile. You feel the heat radiating up through the thin soles of your sandals, a familiar warmth that has baked these stones for centuries. A bustling market hums nearby, the scent of olives and roasting meat mingling with the sharper tang of philosophical debate. You lean against a fluted column, listening to the murmuring voices, watching as shadows lengthen almost imperceptibly, marking the passage of another ancient Greek day. Unlike the rigid, flood-predicting calendar of the Egyptians, or the star-charting solemnity of the Babylonians and their deliberate 7-day cycles, the Greeks had a different kind of obsession. Their gaze wasn't solely fixed on the pragmatic counting of days for agriculture or religious festivals, though they certainly did that. No, the Greeks, they peered into the very soul of the cosmos. You're breathing the same air as Plato and Aristotle, folks who didn't just tell time. They tried to understand it, to place it within a grand, beautiful, and utterly rational universe. And let's be honest, if you were living here then, without air conditioning or even decent plumbing, you'd probably be more concerned with finding a cool spot and a clean toga than pondering the deep structure of the cosmos. Though, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this humidity anyway. Yet these thinkers, sweating just like you, laid the intellectual groundwork that would, much later, influence how we packaged our days. For the Greeks, the concept of cosmos wasn't just the universe. It was an ordered, harmonious, and beautiful whole. Everything from the orbits of the celestial spheres to the growth of a single olive tree was part of this divine order. How could time, then, be anything less than an expression of this perfection? Plato, bless his philosophical cotton socks, wrestled with this in his dialogue Timaeus. He didn't just talk about time, he practically invented it as a philosophical concept. For Plato, time wasn't some independent, pre-existing river flowing through eternity. Oh no, time, he argued, was the moving image of eternity. It was created with the cosmos itself, a dynamic reflection of an unchanging, perfect realm. Imagine that. You're not just counting hours, you're witnessing a cosmic dance, a shadow play of ultimate reality. It sounds a bit like trying to explain a complex algorithm to a fruit fly, but it was profoundly influential. This meant that the rhythms you experience daily, the sunrise, the sunset, the changing moon, weren't arbitrary. They were echoes of this grand, eternal order. It was like the universe was humming a tune, and our daily lives were just one small, slightly off-key note in the symphony. Then you had Aristotle, who, while respecting his former teacher, had a slightly more grounded, shall we say, empirical perspective. For Aristotle, time wasn't some mystical offshoot of eternity. It was simply the number of motion with respect to before and after. You see things move, the sun across the sky, a chariot down the street, your own hand reaching for a bunch of grapes, and time is how you measure that movement. It's a bit less poetic than Plato, like swapping a beautifully crafted sonnet for a detailed spreadsheet, but it's practical. It grounds time in the tangible world, in the observable changes around you. So, while Plato was soaring in the realm of forms, Aristotle was down here, timing how long it took for his apprentice to fetch him another scroll. This fundamental difference in understanding time, one as an emanation of cosmic perfection, the other as a measurement of physical change, meant that the Greeks didn't initially feel the same urgent need as the Babylonians to impose a fixed, recurring 7-day cycle with specific names. Their focus was more on philosophical contemplation of what time was, rather than how to precisely parcel out every day of the week for administrative or astrological purposes. They certainly had their divisions of days and nights, their months tied to the moon, and their festivals. But the underlying drive wasn't to name Tuesday or Wednesday. It was to understand the universal principle behind why anything moved forward at all. You might be thinking, well, that's all very lofty, but what about getting dinner ready? And you'd be right to ask. This philosophical bent created an interesting tension. On one hand, you had these brilliant minds grappling with the very fabric of existence, trying to understand why dawn broke and why yesterday was gone forever. On the other, the average Athenian was still trying to figure out how to pay their taxes and avoid stepping in something unpleasant on the street. The practical application of these cosmic ideas to the daily grind was, shall we say, a work in progress. A quirky tidbit that reflects this is the Greek distinction between chronos and kairos. Chronos is the linear, measurable time that Aristotle talked about seconds, minutes, hours, days. It's the time that ticks by on a clock, if they'd had clocks beyond sundials and water clocks, which were hardly pocket-sized. But then there was kairos. This wasn't about duration, it was about the opportune moment. It was the right time, the perfect instant to act, the pregnant pause before a decision. It was quality time, not just quantity time. So, while you might have chronos counting the minutes until your appointment with the oracle, kairos was that fleeting moment of insight or divine inspiration that made the visit worthwhile. It's a bit like saying you have 24 hours in a day, chronos, but only 5 minutes when your teenager is actually willing to talk to you, kairos. This dual understanding hints at a richer, less rigidly segmented approach to daily life than merely counting off named days. Historians still argue whether the Greek emphasis on cyclical time, the notion that the universe and all its events might repeat in grand cycles, truly hindered the adoption of a uniform, linear week structure, or if it simply provided a different framework for understanding daily rhythms. Did their philosophical curiosity about the nature of time overshadow the naming of it for practical purposes? It's a chicken and egg situation, or perhaps more accurately, a philosopher and chicken crossing the road situation. They were more interested in why the chicken crossed than what day of the week it decided to do so. Their influence on the broader Mediterranean world, however, was immense. While they didn't hand down a neat, named 7-day week, their abstract explorations of cosmic order, causality, and the very concept of time itself provided a profound intellectual backdrop. It was a backdrop against which other cultures, with their more practical or religious motivations, would eventually project their own ways of counting and naming the days. The Greeks, in their deep dives into the universal principles, inadvertently prepared the philosophical soil for the seeds of our modern week to finally take root. They gave the universe a brain, and that brain started thinking about how it kept track of things. You might not have been naming your Monday, but you were certainly philosophizing about its existence. Rome claims the week. Witness how the powerful Roman Empire adopted and systematically spread the planetary names for their days. You're drifting now, a wisp of thought caught between the vastness of the cosmos and the meticulous ponderings of Greek philosophers. You've seen the celestial ballet, felt the quiet hum of time's rhythm, and pondered the why of existence alongside the thinkers of Athens. But as those grand thoughts softly recede, a new, louder rhythm emerges, a beat of marching feet and the clang of steel. Your perspective shifts. You're no longer in a quiet academy, but standing on a dusty road, the scent of olive oil and sweat heavy in the air, the distant roar of a stadium echoing in your ears. This is Rome. This is where practicality trumps abstract contemplation, where order is king, and where the universe, rather than being merely observed, is systematically organized, cataloged, and ultimately harnessed. The Greeks sought understanding. The Romans sought dominion. And in their relentless pursuit of order, they stumbled upon, or rather, decisively absorbed, a system of timekeeping that would forever etch itself into the fabric of daily life. Imagine the scene. Bustling forums, intricate aqueducts defying gravity, legions expanding an empire that sprawls across continents. Amidst this architectural and administrative marvel, time still flowed, and the need to synchronize a vast, diverse populace became paramount. While the Greeks debated the nature of infinity, the Romans were asking, how do we make sure our legions arrive on time, our markets are predictable, and our taxes are collected efficiently? The answer, it turned out, was staring them in the celestial face, though not directly from their own innovation. You see, the Romans were master assimilators. They conquered lands, yes, but they also absorbed cultures, technologies, and ideas with a pragmatism that was both brutal and brilliant. They didn't reinvent the wheel, not when someone else had already perfected the spoke. So when they encountered the powerful concept of the 7-day week, with each day intrinsically linked to a celestial body and its corresponding deity, a concept that had percolated through Babylonian, Egyptian, and Hellenistic cultures, they didn't hesitate. It wasn't about philosophical purity. It was about utility. It was about a coherent, manageable system that could be replicated from the bustling heart of Rome to the distant outposts on the fringes of Britannia. Now lean in close. Feel the cool marble beneath your bare feet as you wander through a Roman villa. Look up at the painted ceiling, depicting the gods. Because those very deities, the ones you learned about in your childhood myths, became the very names you utter when you plan your week. There was the day of the sun, dies solis, a radiant and powerful start to any cycle. Then came the day of the moon, dies luni, casting its gentle, reflective glow. Mars, the god of war, claimed dies Martes, a day for action and decisive movements. Mercury, the swift messenger, lent his name to dies Mercuri, perfect for commerce and communication. Jupiter, the king of the gods, presided over Dies Iovis, a day of majesty and good fortune. Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, graced Dies Veneris, a time for pleasure and art. And finally, Saturn, the ancient god of agriculture and time itself, claimed Dies Saturni, a day for quiet contemplation, perhaps even rest, though not quite the Sabbath we've come to know. These names, whispered in the forums, shouted in the arenas, and meticulously inscribed on calendars, weren't just poetic fancy. They were instruments of order, a universal language for time that transcended local dialects and tribal customs. The sheer logistical might of the Roman Empire ensured their dissemination. Think of the legions, marching thousands of miles, carrying these concepts with them. Think of the Roman roads, stretching like veins across Europe, arteries through which not just goods and soldiers, but ideas and systems flowed. Every new province brought into the Roman fold was introduced to this new, elegant way of segmenting time. It was a cultural imposition, yes, but one so practical, so universally applicable, that it stuck. This wasn't some esoteric philosophical debate confined to university halls. This was the calendar for the common citizen, for the soldier, for the merchant. Here's a reality check for you. If you were trying to navigate Roman society without knowing these day names, without understanding the rhythms they imposed, you probably wouldn't survive this. Not literally, of course, but you'd certainly be at a massive social and economic disadvantage. You'd miss market days, important religious festivals, and probably your appointment with the local tax collector. And trust me, you do not want to miss that appointment. It's a mainstream historical fact that the formal adoption and widespread implementation of the 7-day week, particularly with its planetary names, gained immense momentum under Roman rule. Emperor Constantine's edict in 321 AD, making Sunday, the day of the sun, a public holiday and a day of rest, further solidified this system within the burgeoning Christianized empire. This wasn't just a recommendation. It was an imperial decree, a top-down mandate that ensured the 7-day cycle became the official, established framework for daily life. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Long before the planetary week truly took hold, the Romans actually had their own traditional weekly cycle called the Nundini. This was an 8-day market cycle. Imagine that. You'd go to market every 8th day. It shows that the Romans weren't just passively waiting for a 7-day week to fall into their lap. They had their own system. The gradual shift from the Nundini to the 7-day planetary week is a fascinating example of how even deeply ingrained cultural practices can be superseded by a more widely adopted, arguably more efficient, or simply more influential foreign concept. It wasn't an overnight change. These two systems coexisted for a time, creating a bit of chronological chaos until the planetary week, perhaps aided by its cosmic resonance and later Christian alignment, finally won out. Historians still argue about the precise mechanism through which the planetary week gained such widespread acceptance over older Roman cycles like the Nundini, particularly before the rise of Christianity. Was it purely the practical utility of a more universal system? Was it the perceived mystical power of the celestial associations? Or was it a more gradual, organic integration driven by increasing contact with cultures already utilizing the 7-day structure? The exact tipping point, the moment the 8-day market week truly faded into obscurity in favor of the 7-day planetary rhythm, remains a subject of ongoing scholarly debate, a quiet murmur in the vast halls of historical inquiry. But whatever the precise path, the outcome is undeniable. The Roman Empire, with its legions and laws, its roads and its unwavering will to organize, took a concept born in the ancient Near East, imbued it with the names of its own powerful gods, and then systematically, almost ruthlessly, spread it across the known world. This was the empire that laid the very foundations of the calendar you glance at every single morning. The empire that gave you Sunday, Monday, and Saturday, all rooted in the majestic movements of the heavens, channeled through the pragmatic might of Rome. Planetary patrons of days, understand the specific Roman gods and their corresponding celestial bodies assigned to each day of your week. You're standing, not quite on dusty Roman roads, but in a strange, shimmering space where the scent of ancient incense mingles with the faint, digital hum of your smart speaker. Above you, not the low ceiling of your bedroom, but an impossibly vast dome of midnight blue, studded with gleaming pinpricks of light. Each one of those lights, you realize with a slow, creeping understanding, isn't just a star. It's a god, a deity, colossal and indifferent, watching the tiny, intricate dance of human lives below. And if one of them decided to truly notice you right now, well, let's just say you probably won't survive this. Their very existence would shatter your modern sensibilities, reducing your Instagram feed to cosmic dust. But fear not, little mortal, for these are the gentle, slumber-inducing deities of your very own week. The Romans, masters of efficiency and appropriation, didn't just absorb territories, they absorbed ideas. And when they encountered the powerful concept of a 7-day week, linked to those ever-present celestial wanderers, the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets, they didn't hesitate. They simply slapped their own glorious, dramatic gods onto the schedule, embedding their pantheon directly into the fabric of daily life. Let's journey through your week, day by day, and meet your ancient patrons. Imagine the sun, a fiery orb of pure, unadulterated energy, already beginning its climb. This, for the Romans, was Dies Solis, the day of the sun. Not just any sun, mind you, but the sun god himself, Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. He was a deity of light, truth, and vitality. You can almost feel his warm rays kissing your face, chasing away the remnants of sleep. It was a day for grand pronouncements, for celebrating life and success, much like your modern Sunday, oddly enough, still holds a certain bright, hopeful energy. It's the day you might, perhaps, consider tackling that mountain of laundry you've been avoiding, buoyed by Saul's cheerful disposition, before inevitably deciding a nap is more appropriate. Then, as Saul retreats, giving way to a gentle, pearlescent glow in the evening sky, comes the second day, your Monday. This was Dies Luni, the day of the moon. Luna, the Roman goddess of the moon, was a shimmering, enigmatic figure. She governed the tides, the cycles of nature, and the mysterious depths of the human psyche. Think about it. The moon, ever-changing, waxing and waning, pulling at things unseen. Doesn't that just perfectly describe how you feel when the alarm shrieks on a Monday morning? Your energy levels fluctuating wildly between, I can conquer the world, and I need 5 more hours of sleep, please and thank you. This day was often associated with divination and magic, as Luna's light illuminated hidden truths. It makes you wonder if your current Monday morning dread is just a modern manifestation of an ancient spell gone wrong. Next, you charge into Tuesday, often feeling a renewed, if slightly aggressive, surge of energy. This is no coincidence. This is Dies Martis, the day of Mars. The red planet Mars was named after the Roman god of war, a fierce and potent deity. He was the protector of Rome, a bringer of both conflict and victory. Feel that little spark of determination when you tackle a difficult task. That's Mars whispering in your ear, urging you to conquer your inbox, to brave that challenging meeting. The Romans certainly embraced this day with gusto, often planning military campaigns or important civic actions. Historians still argue whether Mars's influence on Tuesday was more about celebrating martial prowess or simply acknowledging a day dedicated to the most prominent red orb in their night sky. Either way, Tuesdays were not for the faint of heart. As the week progresses, you find yourself in the bustling, often chaotic middle. Welcome to Dies Mercuriae, the day of Mercury. This swift-footed deity, Mercury, was the messenger of the gods, patron of travelers, merchants, tricksters, and naturally, thieves. He was quick-witted, agile, and always on the move. Your Wednesday, with its flurry of emails, phone calls, and constant juggling of tasks, feels perfectly aligned with Mercury's restless energy. He's the original multitasker, able to zip between worlds, delivering messages and facilitating exchanges. If you've ever had a brilliant, fleeting idea that disappears before you can write it down, blame Mercury. He probably just snatched it for himself. It was a day for commerce and communication, for gossip, and perhaps a bit of mischievous planning. Then comes your Thursday, a day often marked by a sense of anticipation, the weekend glimmering on the horizon. This is Dies Iovis, the day of Jupiter. Jupiter, the mighty king of the gods, ruler of the sky and thunder, was the Roman equivalent of Zeus. He was associated with law, order, justice, and all things grand and majestic. When you feel that surge of optimism, that sense of possibility on a Thursday, that's Jupiter reminding you of your own potential, urging you to aim higher, to perhaps consider that extra slice of pizza because, well, you're a god among mortals, aren't you? It was a day for legal proceedings, for making important decisions, and for generally feeling rather powerful. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some Roman calendars noted Jupiter's day as particularly auspicious for taking oaths. So if your Thursday feels particularly binding, you know who to thank, or blame. Next, the most universally beloved day of the week, your Friday. This, of course, is Dies Veneris, the day of Venus. Ah, Venus, the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and fertility. Born from the sea foam, she brought joy, passion, and artistic inspiration wherever she went. Can you feel that delicious sigh of relief as Friday afternoon approaches? That sudden craving for something beautiful, something indulgent, something utterly delightful. That's Venus, working her magic, whispering sweet nothings in your ear, encouraging you to unwind, to seek pleasure, to perhaps treat yourself to that fancy coffee. It was a day for romance, for art, for celebrations, and for generally making sure life felt good. Finally, your Saturday, a day of rest, rejuvenation, and perhaps a touch of melancholic reflection. This is Dies Saturni, the day of Saturn. Saturn, one of the oldest and most complex Roman gods, was associated with agriculture, wealth, time itself, and ultimately melancholy and limitations. He was a god of boundaries, of endings, and new beginnings. He was often depicted with a scythe, a reminder of the harvest and the passage of time. When you use your Saturday for deep cleaning, for organizing, or for contemplating the vastness of your to-do list, you're communing with Saturn's ancient energy. He reminds you of the value of hard work, but also the inevitable passage of time. It was a day often seen as a quieter, more introspective time, a pause before the cycle began anew with the powerful sun. You're standing on the edge of the Roman Empire, where the crisp Mediterranean air gives way to the damp, ancient forests of northern Europe. Remember how Rome, with its unparalleled organizational prowess, solidified, and then systematically spread its 7-day planetary week across its vast dominion. You could practically see the Roman legions, tramping through muddy forests, carrying not just their gladii and standardized road-building techniques, but also the very concept of a 7-day cycle, neatly labeled after their powerful deities. It was practical, it was efficient, and like a catchy tune, it began to seep into the surrounding cultures. But then you step into the world of the Germanic tribes. Picture it. Dense, mist-shrouded woodlands, scattered settlements, and a life that's intimately tied to the land and the changing seasons. No grand colosseums here, no intricate aqueducts. Your survival depends on your axe, your wits, and the strength of your clan. Honestly, if you'd been born into this harsh, unforgiving landscape, you probably wouldn't survive your first winter. No central heating, no immediate access to antibiotics, just raw grit and a deep-seated belief in the powerful, often capricious, gods of your own pantheon. As the Roman Empire expanded, its borders pressed against these Germanic lands. It wasn't always outright conquest. Sometimes it was trade, diplomacy, or just the slow, inevitable creep of cultural influence. Think of it like a very slow-motion cultural osmosis. The Roman week, with its practical utility for markets, military campaigns, and administration, started to make sense. It was undeniably useful. You can almost hear the tribal elders grumbling, perhaps over a horn of mead. This 7-day cycle. It's quite handy for keeping track of battle plans or when the next harvest festival is. But Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, those aren't our gods. Where's Tyr? Where's Woden? Thor wouldn't be caught dead associated with some effete Roman deity. They recognized the brilliance of the system, but they needed to make it their own. They needed a god-swap meet, only, without the actual name tags and lukewarm coffee. This wasn't a formal assembly with a detailed agenda and minutes taken. No, this was a gradual, organic evolution, a kind of linguistic and religious substitution based on conceptual parallels. As the Roman week took hold, the Germanic peoples looked at their own divine roster and found suitable counterparts. It's a bit like trying to find a matching pair of socks in a very dark laundry basket. Sometimes you find a perfect match. Sometimes you just settle for close enough. Let's look at the lineup. For the Roman god Mars, the deity of war, the Germanic tribes chose Tyr, or Tyr as he's known in Norse mythology. Tyr was a god of war, but also of law and justice, a valiant deity who famously lost his hand to the monstrous Fenris wolf in a binding act. A quirky, slightly gruesome tidbit, right? So Mars's day became Tyr's day. You can still hear the echo in our Tuesday, can't you? Then there was Mercury, the Roman messenger of the gods, associated with commerce, travel, eloquence, and magic. The Germanic world offered a powerful, all-encompassing answer. Woden, or Odin the All-Father, god of wisdom, magic, poetry, battle, and the leader of the wild hunt. From Mercury's day to Woden's day, which, with a bit of linguistic chewing over the centuries, softened into our Wednesday. So next time you're stuck in traffic on a Wednesday, just remember you're symbolically navigating the bustling, wisdom-seeking realm of Odin. Probably a good day for podcasts. Jupiter, the Roman king of the gods, master of thunder and the sky, found his undeniable match in Thor. The mighty, hammer-wielding Thor, god of thunder, strength, healing, and protector of mankind. This was perhaps the easiest, most thunderous swap of them all. Jupiter's day transformed into Thor's day. You can still feel the resonant boom in Thursday, can't you? It's no wonder it feels like the longest day sometimes. It's carrying the literal weight of a god's hammer. Finally, Venus, the Roman goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, was replaced by a delightful dual possibility from the Germanic pantheon: Frigg and Freya. Frigg, Odin's wife, was the goddess of marriage, motherhood, and weaving fate. Freya was associated with love, beauty, fertility, war, and even witchcraft. They shared many attributes, and the name Frigg's Day or Freya's Day, depending on the dialect and region, evolved into our Friday. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? A day for love, perhaps a little magic, and definitely looking forward to the weekend. But what about Saturday, Sunday, and Monday? Why did they largely escape the Germanic god swap? Well, Sunday and Monday were universal. The sun and moon were celestial bodies revered by virtually all ancient cultures, transcending specific pantheons. There was simply no need to swap out cosmic powerhouses. Sun's day and moon's day remained. As for Saturday, dedicated to Saturn, the Roman god of agriculture, wealth, liberation, and time itself, he was an older, more somber deity. Saturn's day persisted. Historians still argue whether this was due to a lack of a truly equivalent Germanic deity, or simply because the name had already become so deeply entrenched by the time the other swaps occurred. Perhaps the Germanic tribes were just tired after all those other divine rearrangements and decided to call it a week. "Ah, we've swapped enough gods, let's keep Saturn," he seems. Quiet, these newly adopted, culturally tailored names, embedded in the daily rhythms of Germanic life, gradually solidified. As Old English began to form, influenced by these powerful Germanic roots, these names became the bedrock of our modern week. You're living proof of this ancient linguistic and cultural merger every single day you look at your calendar. It wasn't an overnight decree. This was centuries of slow, organic evolution, of whispers changing to words, and words changing to bedrock parts of our language, connecting you to cosmic rhythms and ancient gods, whether you know it or not. And as these names settled, becoming as familiar as the beating of your own heart, the world continued to spin, and new forces would rise to imprint their own influence on the very fabric of timekeeping you take for granted. Norse mythology's day names. You're huddled close, perhaps by a crackling fire that casts dancing shadows on your face, the kind of fire that kept ancient Germanic tribes from freezing solid during those brutal, frost-nipped winters. You might think about those powerful Roman emperors, spreading their planetary names like an invasive species of urban planning, stamping their celestial signatures onto every corner of the known world. But as you probably recall, when their legions bumped up against the northern forests, they didn't just find a bunch of shivering folks ready to sign on the dotted line of Roman cultural dominance. Oh no. The northern tribes, with their deep-rooted mythologies and fierce deities, were not about to just roll over and accept a new pantheon as if it were a casual gift basket. Instead, a rather fascinating cultural negotiation took place. Imagine it like a divine swap meet, or perhaps a cosmic casting call where the roles for Day of the Week patron were already taken. But the new contenders had strikingly similar resumes. This wasn't a hostile takeover, mind you, more like a very polite, very gradual rebranding. The Roman days, tied to their specific gods, found their counterparts in the Norse and Germanic pantheons. It's what historians rather dryly call interpretatio Germanica, essentially. Germanic interpretation. But for you and me, nestled here in the cozy shadows, it was the moment your Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday really started to take shape, morphing from Roman imports into something distinctly, powerfully northern. Take Tuesday, for instance. In Rome, it was Dies Martis, the day of Mars, god of war. Now the Germanic peoples had their own war god, Tyr or Til. You might picture him as a one-handed deity, having sacrificed his hand to bind the monstrous wolf Fenrir, a tale that probably makes your own breakfast struggles seem utterly quaint by comparison. So Dies Martis became Tyl's Day, eventually evolving into our modern Tuesday. It made perfect sense, a divine parallel in martial might. This wasn't just a linguistic accident. It was a conscious, deliberate choice, an act of cultural translation that honored both the incoming structure and the deeply held indigenous beliefs. The people of the North weren't just adopting. They were adapting, making it their own with a hearty, guttural shout. Then comes Wednesday. This one is perhaps the most iconic, the linchpin of the Norse transition. The Roman dies Mercury, Mercury's day, was associated with the swift messenger god, patron of commerce, eloquence, and trickery. Who among the Norse gods fit that bill? None other than Odin or Woden, as he was known in Anglo-Saxon. Woden was the All-Father, the chief of the Aesir, a god of wisdom, magic, poetry, and war. He traversed the 9 realms, often in disguise, seeking knowledge, and he was known for his cunning and prophetic abilities. He even sacrificed an eye for wisdom, which, let's be honest, is a pretty serious commitment to learning. So Woden's day became Wednesday, a transformation that cemented the supreme deity of the Norse pantheon right in the middle of your week. You can practically hear the sagas echoing in its syllables. It's a mainstream historical fact that this specific linguistic swap is why we have Wednesday as we know it. But let's talk about a quirky tidbit for a moment. While Odin was the supreme god, associated with wisdom and cunning, there's an interesting, lesser-known aspect to the day named after him. Some scholars suggest that the emphasis on Odin's role as a psychopomp, guiding souls to the afterlife, might also have played a subtle role. Imagine the quiet understanding among the Germanic peoples that Wednesday, Odin's day, carried a whisper of the spiritual journey, of the veil between worlds. It adds a certain somber, thoughtful depth to your midweek slump, doesn't it? Almost as if, deep down, you're instinctively attuned to the ancient whispers of the departed, though you probably won't survive this day if you start rambling about psychopomps in your morning meeting. Best to keep that tidbit just between us. Moving on, you feel the rumble of thunder, the surge of raw power as Thursday arrives. For the Romans, this was Dies Javis, Jupiter's day, honoring the king of the gods, wielder of lightning and patron of the sky. Who else but Thor, the mighty hammer-wielding god of thunder, protector of Midgard, could possibly stand in for Jupiter? Thor, with his boundless strength and fiery temper, was perhaps the most beloved and worshipped of the Norse gods, the everyday hero of the common folk. So Thor's day it became, and our Thursday thunders on, a direct descendant of his mighty Mjolnir. It's a day for strength, for action, perhaps even for a bit of well-placed, thunderous defiance when your alarm clock dares to challenge your morning peace. And finally, you drift towards the end of the work week, to Friday. The Roman dies Veneris was Venus's day, dedicated to the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. Here, the Germanic translation gets a little more nuanced, a touch more debated. Was it Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, war, and fertility, who rode in her chariot pulled by cats? Or was it Frigg, Odin's wife, goddess of marriage, motherhood, and fate, who spun the clouds? Both were powerful, venerated goddesses associated with similar domains. Historians still argue whether Friday derives from Freya's name or Frigg's, as their roles and names often overlapped in various regional dialects. It's a delightful mystery, like trying to decide which of two equally fabulous outfits to wear to a divine banquet. Either way, Friday became a day consecrated to a powerful female deity, a beacon of love, beauty, and perhaps a touch of domestic magic, setting the stage for your weekend revelry. You could almost feel the collective sigh of relief as this day dedicated to powerful female deities rolled around, a sigh that probably hasn't changed much over the millennia. The sheer elegance of this god swap is breathtaking. It wasn't a random pick and choose. It was a carefully considered cultural exchange, a recognition of shared archetypes and divine functions across seemingly disparate cultures. The swift messenger Mercury finds his parallel in the wise wanderer Odin. The mighty skyfather Jupiter aligns with the thunderous Thor. The fierce warrior Mars sees his reflection in the one-handed Tyr. And the goddesses of love and fertility, Venus, find their echoes in the beloved Freya or Frigg. It speaks to a fascinating commonality in human experience, a shared need to categorize and understand the cosmos through the lens of powerful beings, even if their names and specific stories differed. This process wasn't instantaneous. It unfolded over centuries as various Germanic tribes interacted with the Roman Empire and later, with the Christian missionaries who carried the Roman calendar with them. The conversion was gradual, blending existing beliefs with new structures. It's a testament to the resilience of cultural identity, how traditions adapt and persist, even when confronted with powerful external forces. You can almost see the ancient people, sitting around their fires, telling stories of Odin and Thor, weaving these figures into the fabric of their daily lives, right down to the names of the days themselves. And so, your week from Tuesday to Friday carries the echoes of these mighty Norse deities, a silent testament to a world where gods walked among mortals, and their stories shaped the very rhythm of time. The Roman legacy gave us the framework, the 7-day cycle. Remember that cosmic rhythm we talked about, the one linked to celestial bodies. But the northern peoples gave us the personalities, the grit, the magic, the sheer mythical power that still whispers from your calendar, even if you're just marking off the days until your next delivery of questionable takeout food. It's a legacy that is both deeply ancient and surprisingly present, binding you to the echoes of gods and giants with every passing sunrise. You listen closely now, almost feeling the whisper of ancient tongues curling around your ears, like a cool, pre-dawn mist rising from the ruins of a Roman villa, or perhaps the dew-kissed leaves outside a longhouse in the ancient Germanic forests. We've seen how those foundational ideas, the Roman planetary patrons and the spirited Norse replacements, took root. But the real linguistic magic, the kind that makes your brain do a sleepy little cartwheel, lies in how those roots branched out, entwining and separating across the vast tapestry of Europe, birthing the diverse day names we murmur today. Imagine, if you will, the bustling marketplace of a Roman province. People are haggling over amphorae of olive oil. Children are chasing pigeons. And everyone, from the legionnaire to the baker, is using those familiar, rhythmic Latin day names. Dies Solis, Dies Luni, Dies Martis, and so on. As the Roman Empire stretched its colossal influence, so too did its language. And when the empire eventually fractured, those Latin roots didn't just wither away. They blossomed into the vibrant family of Romance languages we know today. French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, and more. In French, for instance, you can almost hear the ghost of the moon in Lundi from Luni dies. Tuesday becomes Mardi, a direct echo of Mars. Wednesday, Mercredi, clearly stemming from Mercury. Thursday, Judy honors Jupiter, and Friday, Vendredi whispers Venus. See how smoothly that glides. It's like watching a well-oiled historical machine, perfectly translating the celestial patrons into daily usage. Spanish and Italian follow suit with delightful consistency. Lunes, Marts, Miracles, Juves, Viernes in Spanish. Lunedì, Martedì, Mercaldi, Giavdi, Venerdì in Italian. It's almost disappointingly straightforward, really, like finding out your favorite mystery novel ends exactly how you predicted on page 2. Now pause and consider Saturday and Sunday in these Romance languages. Here, things get interesting, a little less predictable. While French samedi and Italian sabato retain a clear link to Saturn's day, Saturni dies, Spanish and Portuguese shift to sabato. This isn't a direct planetary link. It's a nod to the Sabbath, the day of rest derived from Hebrew tradition, an absorption of religious significance into the weekly rhythm. And Sunday, the proud sun's day, often transforms into the Lord's day. French dimanche, Italian domenica, Spanish domingo, all derive from the Latin dies Dominicus, the Lord's day. It's a quiet but profound transformation, a subtle rechristening that reflects the growing influence of Christianity, slowly nudging aside the overt pagan origins. This widespread adoption of Christian-themed names for the weekend in many Romance languages is a mainstream historical fact, illustrating how deeply cultural and religious shifts embed themselves in linguistic structures. But what about our Germanic cousins? Remember the powerful Norse pantheon, those boisterous gods we talked about just a little while ago, elbowing out their Roman equivalents. Their linguistic echoes are equally fascinating. English, German, and Dutch, among others, carry the genetic imprint of these ancient substitutions. Sunday and Monday remain clear, direct translations of the sun and moon's days, reflecting a universal reverence for the two most prominent celestial bodies. No arguments there, thankfully, because honestly, trying to track the precise phonetic shifts from Marty's dies to Marty across a dozen dialects, while simultaneously figuring out how a sun became Sonntag and a moon became Montag in German, and then Mondag in Dutch. You'd probably lose your mind, or at least your afternoon nap, trying to map out every single linguistic twist. Tuesday in English is Tuesday. In German, Dienstag. While the English retains the direct Norse deity, Dienstag likely comes from Dingesdag, a day for assemblies or things, like a governing assembly, though some scholars link it to Mardi or even a Norse god of law. Wednesday, our Woden's Day, becomes the German Mittwoch and the Dutch Woensdag. Mittwoch literally means midweek in German, another example of a semantic shift away from the pagan deity, perhaps reflecting a more pragmatic, less mythological approach to naming. Then there's Thursday, the mighty Thor's day, which sails smoothly into German Donnerstag. Thunder Day, Thor being the god of thunder and Dutch Donderdag. And Friday, our beloved Freya's day, transforms into German Freitag and Dutch Vrijdag. These connections are wonderfully transparent, a clear testament to the Germanic tribes' determination to stamp their own cultural identity onto the Roman weekly template. It's like they were saying, "Thanks for the concept, Rome, but we'll just swap out the wallpaper with our own glorious pantheon, if you don't mind." It shows a powerful cultural assertion, doesn't it? Now for a quirky tidbit that beautifully illustrates the diverse array of European day names: the Portuguese. While Spanish and Italian follow the direct Latin planetary lineage, mostly, Portuguese decided to march to the beat of its own drum for the weekdays. After Domingo, Sunday, Lord's Day, and Segunda-feira, Monday, second fair or second day of the fair. You get Terça-feira, Tuesday. Third fair, Quarta-feira, Wednesday. Fourth fair, Quinta-feira, Thursday. Fifth fair, and Sexta-feira, Friday. Sixth fair. Saturday, Sabado, aligns with the Sabbath. This numerical system, deriving from ecclesiastical Latin usage where feria meant day. Specifically, a weekday as opposed to a feast day is a fascinating deviation. It's as if they decided, planets, gods, too much effort, let's just count. And frankly, after trying to pronounce all those variations, you can almost empathize with their decision to simplify things. So you see how these two grand linguistic families, Latin and Germanic, diverged and converged, creating a mosaic of names across the continent. Historians still argue whether the Germanic god swap was a deliberate, unified act of cultural defiance, or a more organic, piecemeal evolution influenced by local dialects and the ebb and flow of religious conversion. But what's undeniable is the enduring legacy. Every time you say Tuesday or Mardi, you're not just naming a day. You're echoing millennia of celestial observation, divine patronage, cultural negotiation, and linguistic innovation. It's a tiny daily act of history, whispered on your tongue. You find yourself now, perhaps a little sleepier, standing at a crossroads in the ancient world. The echoes of Latin and Germanic tongues still reverberate, naming the days after their thunder gods and shining planets. But a new, quiet hum begins to rise from the catacombs and hidden meeting places. It's a different kind of rhythm, one not born from the sun's daily arc or the moon's monthly cycle, but from a profound internal shift. You feel it in the hushed whispers of early believers, the scent of lamp oil and the quiet murmur of prayers as they gather in secret, their week now imbued with a meaning beyond the celestial or the martial. Imagine the sheer audacity of it, to take a system perfected by astronomers and poets, adopted by emperors and barbarians, and say, actually, our week is about this. Suddenly, the focus wasn't on the fiery gaze of Mars or the benevolent smile of Venus. It was on something far more personal, far more communal, and undeniably, eternally significant. For the early Christians, the week became a story, a narrative arc culminating in a day of unparalleled importance. You see them heads bowed, not to Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, but to the sun, risen. This shift wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic overthrow, mind you. It was more like a slow, deliberate repainting of a masterpiece, layer by painstaking layer, until the original imagery, though still faintly visible beneath, served a new, grander purpose. For centuries, the Jewish people had observed the Sabbath on the seventh day, a holy day of rest commemorating creation. It was a cornerstone of their identity, a powerful rhythm that set them apart. And you, if you were a Jew in those times, would have been deeply rooted in this weekly cessation of labor, this profound pause. But for the followers of Christ, something pivotal happened on the first day of the week. The resurrection. This single event, they believed, fundamentally altered the cosmic clock. It was the genesis of a new creation, a spiritual rebirth. And so, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the emphasis shifted. From the solemn quiet of Saturday, your attention, if you were a Christian, would drift towards the dawning light of Sunday. This wasn't about disrespecting the old ways, but embracing a new revelation. It was about marking time not by the planet's silent ballet, but by a divine intervention that shattered the chains of death. Now, picture yourself in the bustling marketplace of a thriving Roman city, maybe Antioch or Alexandria. You're trying to sell your finest earthenware, but the chatter around you isn't just about prices or gossip. It's about this new cult, these Christians, and their peculiar habits. They gather on the day of the sun, not to worship the sun god, but for their own mysterious rituals. This was the mainstream historical fact that cemented the shift. Emperor Constantine, a man who, let's be honest, had bigger fish to fry than calendar reform, issued a civil decree in 321 AD. It mandated that judges, townspeople, and all artisans were to rest on the venerable day of the sun. Suddenly, your Sunday, though still bearing the name of a pagan deity, became a day of official repose. No more pottery sales, no more crafting fine scrolls. Just rest. Or, if you were Christian, church. Imagine trying to explain the concept of a weekend to a Roman citizen who works every day of the year. You probably won't survive that conversation, especially if you suggest they deserve time off. This wasn't an overnight conversion of hearts and minds, though. The names of the days, so deeply ingrained in the linguistic fabric of the empire, remained stubbornly pagan. Even as you, a fledgling Christian, might go to worship on the day of the sun, you still referred to the following day as the day of the moon, and so on. It's a bit like still calling your modern-day phone a wireless telephone, technically accurate, but clearly an echo of an older era. The new faith was overlaying its significance onto an existing structure, a clever act of cultural appropriation, if you will, without the need for a full-scale linguistic revolution. They didn't need to rename them. They simply redefined their purpose. And here's a quirky little tidbit. While the Roman names largely stuck in the West, some early Christian communities, particularly in the Greek East and parts of the Middle East, developed a numerical system for their days. They literally called Sunday Lord's Day, Monday second day, Tuesday third day, and so on, right up to Saturday as the Sabbath. It was a deliberate, subtle rejection of the pagan associations, a quiet act of defiance against the planetary patrons. You can almost hear the soft, insistent murmur of a Greek monk counting his days, eschewing the names of foreign gods for a purely scriptural ordering. It highlights the internal tension. How do you honor your new god while still navigating a world steeped in the old god's names? It was a calendar conundrum that played out differently across the sprawling reach of early Christendom. You might wonder, as historians still argue whether Constantine's motivation for Sunday legislation was purely religious fervor, or a shrewd political move to unite a disparate empire. How much of this was genuine piety versus savvy statecraft? Was he truly touched by divine inspiration, or was he simply consolidating power by co-opting a burgeoning religious movement? The truth, as always, is probably a murky blend of both. Perhaps he saw the utility of a common day of rest for a vast workforce, or the potential for social cohesion that a shared religious observance could bring. Whatever his primary driver, the effect was profound. The week, for countless generations to come, would carry the indelible mark of Christian influence. So, while the thunderous stride of Thor and the graceful dance of Freya still resonated in the names of your Tuesday and Friday, the meaning of your entire week began to pivot. It was no longer just a cycle of work and rest dictated by imperial decree or planetary superstition. It became a reflection of salvation, a journey from the Lord's day to the next, a constant reminder of resurrection and redemption. The weekdays, once mere markers of celestial influence, now served as stepping stones towards a spiritual destination. You walk through your week now, carrying this legacy, perhaps unknowingly, but it's there, woven into the very fabric of your time. This quiet, almost imperceptible shift from cosmic rhythm, to sacred narrative fundamentally redefined the very concept of your 7-day cycle. You're still feeling the faint echo of ancient Christian bells, the subtle shift in focus from planetary deities to a singular spiritual rhythm. But before you can fully settle into that contemplative quiet, a different kind of order begins to assert itself. Imagine, if you will, the clamor of the Roman Forum, the bustling streets alive with citizens, senators, and slaves, all grappling with a calendar that frankly made absolutely no sense. You're trying to schedule a gladiatorial contest, perhaps a pivotal political vote, or just a simple dinner party, and everyone's using a slightly different version of today. It's pure chaos. You're constantly asking, is that this Kalen's or the next Nones? You're doing mental gymnastics just to figure out when your lease is up, let alone when the next full moon is supposed to bless your harvest. Honestly, if you lived back then, trying to coordinate anything, you probably wouldn't survive the sheer administrative headache. You'd probably just give up, curl into a ball, and let fate decide when you next ate. Before Caesar, the Roman calendar was a glorious, bewildering mess, a patchwork of lunar cycles and political whims. It was theoretically based on the moon, but priests, known as the pontifices, held the power to add or subtract days, even months, to keep festivals aligned with the seasons. This was, as you can imagine, ripe for abuse. A consul who wanted to extend his term might add a few extra days, while another, keen to wrap things up, might shorten the year. Your taxes due. Perhaps a few days could be lopped off the month to bring the deadline forward. Trying to run an empire, or even a modest olive oil business, under such fluctuating time was like trying to navigate the Mediterranean in a sieve. It was less about predictable solar cycles, and more about political expediency. A system so arbitrary it would make your modern-day tax accountant weep. Remember our brief detour into the elegant precision of the Egyptian calendar, tied so neatly to the Nile's floods. Well, the Roman system, by comparison, felt like it was tied to the whims of a particularly indecisive goose. Enter Julius Caesar, a man of ambition, military genius, and, crucially, a man who understood the fundamental need for order, not just on the battlefield, but in the very fabric of daily life. During his campaigns in Egypt, you can picture him, perhaps by the soft glow of a flickering lamp, discussing the intricacies of their sophisticated calendar with the astronomer Sosigenes of Alexandria. It said Sosigenes laid out the principles for a solar calendar, a system far superior to Rome's lunar mess. Caesar, being the pragmatic visionary he was, didn't just listen, he acted. He wasn't just interested in conquering Gaul. He wanted to conquer time itself. And so, in 46 BC, he unleashed what became known as the Year of Confusion, an epic 445-day monster designed to realign the calendar with the true solar year. Imagine that New Year's Eve, if they even knew when it was stretching on and on and on. You'd open your last present in April and still be waiting for the next year to begin. The core innovation, the stroke of genius that would shape time for the next 16 centuries, was elegantly simple. A year of 365 days, with an extra day added every 4 years to account for the Earth's orbital period being approximately 365.25 days. This leap year, the bisextile day, was initially inserted after February 24th, essentially creating two 24th of Februaries. So, if you had a birthday on February 25th, you might have had to wait an extra day for your cake every 4 years. Tough luck. This Julian calendar, as it swiftly became known, brought an unprecedented level of standardization to the Roman world. No longer were the pontifices able to manipulate the length of the year for political gain. Merchants could plan their shipping schedules with confidence. Farmers knew when to plant and harvest, and soldiers understood when their enlistment terms truly ended. It was a calendar built for an empire, designed for efficiency, and it stretched its influence far beyond the city of Rome, carried by legions and administrators across vast territories. You suddenly had a shared timeline, a universal rhythm that unified disparate cultures under the Roman banner, from the chilly outposts of Britannia to the sun-baked deserts of North Africa. This new system meant that the day names, which we traced back to their planetary patrons and then saw morph with Germanic deities, now had a stable framework within which to operate. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, these days, regardless of their linguistic evolution, now consistently found themselves within a reliably measured year. It was a monumental achievement in timekeeping, a testament to Roman engineering and the practical application of scientific knowledge, even if that knowledge was borrowed from elsewhere. Historians still debate the precise level of astronomical knowledge available to Caesar's advisors, particularly Sosigenes of Alexandria, and whether their calculations were truly groundbreaking or built heavily on existing Egyptian knowledge. Was it a Roman innovation, or a brilliant Roman appropriation and implementation of existing foreign expertise? The Julian calendar reigned supreme for an astonishingly long time. Think about it. From 45 BC until 1582 AD, when the Gregorian reform finally took hold. That's over 1,600 years of global timekeeping based on Julius Caesar's decree. It became the bedrock of European civilization, underpinning everything from religious festivals to legal contracts. Imagine trying to tell Shakespeare or Galileo that their concept of time was slightly off. They lived and breathed by the Julian rhythm. However, for all its revolutionary accuracy compared to its predecessors, the Julian calendar wasn't perfect. It was off by a tiny, almost imperceptible amount. The actual length of the solar year isn't precisely 365.25 days. It's closer to 365.2422 days. That small difference, accumulating over centuries, meant that by the 16th century, the calendar had drifted by about 10 days. The vernal equinox, crucial for determining the date of Easter, was falling earlier and earlier, pushing away from its astronomical reality. You see, even the most brilliant solutions sometimes carry the seeds of their own eventual obsolescence. The Julian calendar was a giant leap forward, a true standardization that allowed societies to coordinate on a scale never before imagined. It provided a stable stage upon which the drama of the named days could play out, ensuring that when you said dies solis or Sunday, everyone knew roughly where they stood in the grand cosmic dance of the year. But that tiny, almost imperceptible drift, that microscopic error in calculation, would eventually necessitate yet another overhaul, another monumental effort to nudge humanity's concept of time back into alignment with the relentless, unyielding march of the cosmos. For now, however, the Julian era was a period of stability, a long, quiet reign where the days you named, whether for Roman gods or Germanic heroes, marched in a consistent, predictable rhythm, laying the groundwork for the modern world you inhabit. They provided the steady pulse that allowed empires to grow, religions to flourish, and daily life to unfurl with a newfound sense of order. A reliable beat that resonated through centuries. ensuring that for the vast majority of its history, your week had a stable, predictable year to call home. Gregorian reform and precision. Understand how Pope Gregory XIII's calendar further refined time, securing our current day naming system. You're drifting now, through the soft haze of history, past the grand arches of Rome, past Caesar's mighty decrees, and into a time where even the most orderly system, the magnificent Julian calendar we just explored, began to show its cracks. Imagine for a moment that you're living in the late 16th century. You wake up, the sun filtering through a window that seems to tell you it's spring, but the calendar insists it's still very much winter. The chill bites at your nose, and you squint at the date, feeling a subtle disquiet. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience for sleepy peasants. This was a theological crisis for the church. The Julian calendar, as robust as it had been, had a tiny, almost imperceptible flaw. It calculated the length of a year as precisely 365.25 days. The actual solar year, the time it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun, is slightly shorter. 365.2422 days. That minuscule difference, a mere 11 minutes and 14 seconds each year, accumulated over centuries. By the 16th century, those grains had piled up. The calendar was about 10 days out of sync with the actual solar events, specifically the vernal equinox. For you, the modern time traveler, this might seem like a quaint historical footnote, but for the medieval church, it was a cataclysm. Why? Because Easter, the most significant Christian festival, is tied directly to the vernal equinox. If the equinox was sliding earlier, then Easter was being celebrated at the wrong time, drifting further from its astronomical and theological moorings. It's akin to celebrating Christmas in July because your calendar app got confused. Chaos, right? The Council of Trent, that monumental gathering of Catholic dignitaries in the mid-1500s, had specifically called for calendar reform. Enter Pope Gregory XIII. Imagine him, a man of profound intellect and even more profound determination, sitting in the Vatican, surrounded by astronomers and mathematicians, all poring over charts and calculations. He understood the gravity of the situation and knew that correcting the calendar was paramount. The task fell largely to a Calabrian doctor named Aloysius Lilius, who, tragically, died before his proposed reforms could be implemented. But his brother, Antonio, presented Lilius's comprehensive plan to the Papal Commission, which then adopted it. It was a posthumous victory for precision, a testament to a man whose legacy you now live by, even if you've never heard his name. The reform was radical, yet elegant. To correct the accumulated error, Pope Gregory XIII issued the papal bull Inter Gravissimus on February 24, 1582. This decree stated that Thursday, October 4, 1582, would be immediately followed by Friday, October 15, 1582. Think about that for a second. 10 days simply vanished from existence. One moment you're marking October 4th on your beautifully illuminated calendar, and the next, poof, it's October 15th, and you've missed a whole week and a half of your life. You probably won't survive this kind of temporal leap if it happened to you today. Your internal clock would simply revolt, probably leading to an existential crisis over lost productivity. Imagine trying to explain that to your boss. Sorry I'm late, my calendar just skipped 10 days. This immediate jump corrected the historical drift, bringing the vernal equinox back to March 21st, where it ideally should be for Easter calculations. But more importantly, the Gregorian reform introduced a new, far more accurate leap year rule to prevent future drift. Under the Julian system, every fourth year was a leap year. The new rule stated that a year is a leap year if it is divisible by 4, with one exception. If it is a century year, like 1700, 1800, 1900, it is only a leap year if it is divisible by 400. So 1600 was a leap year, but 1700, 1800, and 1900 were not. 2000 was. This seemingly small adjustment meant the average length of the Gregorian year became 365.2425 days, remarkably close to the actual solar year. The error was reduced to a mere 26 seconds per year, meaning it would take approximately 3,300 years for the calendar to be off by just one day. That's precision on a whole new level, a kind of temporal fine-tuning that makes your smartwatches look like sundials. This reform was overseen and meticulously calculated by Christopher Clavius, a brilliant Jesuit mathematician and astronomer. He was the chief architect of the calendar's implementation, a man who, if he were alive today, would probably be coding algorithms for a space agency, or perhaps meticulously organizing your unruly sock drawer with scientific precision. His work secured the system we use today, a system so ingrained that you never question why certain years have an extra day, or why February suddenly gets an extra 24 hours tacked onto its otherwise melancholic existence. The adoption of the Gregorian calendar, however, was far from immediate or universal. Catholic countries, such as Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, adopted it almost instantly in 1582, but Protestant nations, initially, resisted. They viewed it as a papal imposition, a Catholic plot to undermine their own religious and political autonomy. England, for example, didn't adopt the Gregorian calendar until 1752, by which point an additional day had accumulated, meaning they had to drop 11 days. Imagine the confusion, the economic disruption, the poor souls who celebrated birthdays on the missing days. There were riots in some places, with people demanding, "Give us back our 11 days." Historians still argue whether the resistance was purely religious or also driven by national pride and an inherent human aversion to change, especially when it involves something as fundamental as the passage of time. This gradual, sometimes contentious, adoption cemented the 7-day week's place, not by directly renaming the days. Those names had largely been set by the Romans and then the Germanic tribes, but by making the entire calendar system astronomically sound and globally consistent. The days, with their inherited names, were now anchored within a framework of incredible precision, a framework that allowed for synchronized global communication, commerce, and scientific endeavor. The Gregorian reform didn't invent Tuesday or Wednesday, but it ensured that Tuesday in London was the same Tuesday as in Rome, and that both were aligned with the true celestial rhythm, far more accurately than ever before. It brought a scientific rigor to timekeeping that had previously been lacking, ensuring that the dance of the planets and the rotation of the Earth were no longer just a loose guide, but a meticulously choreographed ballet. So as you drift deeper into the past, consider this. The names of the days so familiar to you survived countless empires, religious shifts, and linguistic transformations. But it was the precision of Pope Gregory XIII's reform, building on centuries of astronomical observation and mathematical genius, that ultimately secured their place in a globally recognized, accurate, and remarkably stable system of time. You wake up, you know it's a Tuesday, and you can be almost entirely certain that the rest of the world agrees with you. All thanks to a small, nearly imperceptible error corrected centuries ago. You drift perhaps not in sleep, but through the vast, echoing halls of human history, where time itself is not a constant, but a malleable river shaped by the hands of our ancestors. You feel the cool, ancient air on your skin, smell the dust of forgotten scrolls, and hear the faint whispers of stargazers from millennia past. They weren't just charting constellations. They were mapping your week, piece by painstaking piece, though perhaps not in the way you know it. You pull out your phone, glance at the date, at the day of the week, and you realize in this moment that this simple, everyday convenience is a grand tapestry woven from threads spun on every continent, not just those familiar European ones we've been tracing. If you had to, right now, accurately calculate and name the days of the week based purely on the cycles of the moon without any external reference, well, let's just say your odds of survival in a pre-calendar world might be slim. The story of the week, you see, isn't exclusively a Roman epic or a Germanic saga. While the planetary patrons and their Norse stand-ins were duking it out for linguistic supremacy across Europe, other cultures, far removed, were having their own profound conversations with the cosmos and the rhythm of their lives, devising their own ways to slice the grand pie of time. And many of them didn't even settle on 7. Imagine, for a moment, being in ancient China, where the week wasn't a given. Here, a common cycle was the Zun Chinese letter, a 10-day period that often aligned with governmental decrees, market days, or agricultural tasks. Think of it as a mini-month, a decimal approach to daily life, quite different from the septenary rhythm you're accustomed to. Days might be referred to numerically within that Zun, first day of the Zun, second day, and so on. It was incredibly practical for administrative purposes, for counting out the periods of a lunar cycle, or even for organizing educational terms. This 10-day division was deeply ingrained, a mainstream historical fact of Chinese timekeeping for centuries before the 7-day week really began to make inroads. When the 7-day week finally did arrive in China, primarily through Buddhist influences from India around the 4th century CE, it didn't just seamlessly overwrite their existing systems. Instead, it was adopted, adapted, and integrated. And the names they chose were elegantly logical. Instead of deities or planets, they often went with numbers. Monday became Zinki Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Literally, week period 1. Tuesday, Zinki Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Week period 2. And so on, right up to Sunday, Zinki Rai Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, the Sunday. Yes, even there, the sun got a special shout-out, a nod to its universal significance, much like our own Sunday. It's a beautifully pragmatic approach, isn't it? No squabbles between Jupiter and Thor, just a straightforward count. Venturing further south, you find yourself in the vibrant, spiritual landscape of ancient India, where the concept of time was as intricate and layered as their philosophical texts. Here, the 7-day week, known as Vara, Vasat, Enus, took root millennia ago, with each day often named after one of the classical planets, much like the Roman system. So you have Ravivara for Sunday, Sun's day, Somavara for Monday, Moon's day, Mangalavara for Tuesday, Mars' day, and so forth. This planetary association wasn't a direct copy-paste from Rome. Rather, it's believed to have developed independently or through very early, indirect astrological exchanges. The Indian astronomical and astrological traditions were incredibly sophisticated, meticulously tracking planetary movements, and it was only natural for these celestial bodies to lend their names to the cycle of days. This deep-seated connection between the planets and the days continues to influence the naming conventions in many modern Indian languages, a testament to its enduring power. Now, for a quirky tidbit. In some parts of West Africa, particularly among the Igbo people, their traditional week was not 7 days, but 4. It was called the Izu, and each day had a distinct spiritual or practical significance, often tied to market cycles or ancestral veneration. You might have Ik, Ori, Afo, and Nkwo, and these days would cycle and repeat, dictating community gatherings, trade, and even the timing of specific rituals. Imagine a world where your weekend was only 2 days, but the entire week was just 4. It highlights how different cultures prioritize different rhythms based on their immediate needs and beliefs, not just celestial observations. The market day, for instance, was paramount, making a shorter, market-centric week incredibly efficient. Then there's the truly mind-bending timekeeping of Mesoamerica, particularly the Maya. While they had an astonishingly precise understanding of celestial mechanics, their week wasn't a simple, repeating cycle like ours. Instead, their calendar was a grand, interlocking system of various cycles. You had the 260-day Tzolk'in, a sacred calendar made up of 20-day names combined with 13 numbers, and the 365-day Hob, a civil calendar of 18 months of 20 days plus a 5-day unlucky period. Days in the Tzolk'in, like a mix, crocodile, or ik, wind, were named and carried specific energies. So while they had day names, they weren't part of a fixed, short week that repeats every 7 rotations. Instead, they were part of larger, much more complex cycles that intermeshed, creating a unique signature for every single day over thousands of years. It's a beautiful system, but one that would send your Google Calendar into a digital meltdown trying to keep track. Historians still argue whether the Mayas' lack of a direct 7-day week indicates an independent evolutionary path for time-telling or simply a different focus on longer, more profound cosmological cycles. But what is undeniable is that their names for days, whether Emix or Chikchin, serpent, were not only descriptive but deeply imbued with spiritual meaning, far removed from the planetary patrons we've come to know. You stir perhaps in the soft warmth of your bed, feeling the subtle, unseen gears of time turning, pushing you from one moment into the next, from one day into another. You might even glance at the digital clock on your nightstand, its glowing numbers a silent, ever-present testament to the relentless march of seconds, minutes, and hours. But stop for a moment. Feel the hum of your own inner clock, the one that somehow, almost instinctively, knows that tomorrow is Monday, or that the weekend is just around the corner. That deep-seated rhythm, that unquestioning acceptance of a 7-day cycle, is so profoundly ingrained that you probably never pause to consider its monumental strangeness. And honestly, if you were born just a few millennia ago, without any established calendar system, your life would be so chaotic and short that you probably wouldn't survive long enough to care about a 7-day week anyway. But here you are, safe in your bed, benefiting from centuries of human struggle to impose order on the cosmos. You've seen how various cultures, driven by necessity and curiosity, began to parcel out time. You remember the Babylonians, with their profound celestial observations, and the Egyptians, masters of the Nile's predictable floods. You've even dipped your toes into the spiritual depths of the Hebrew Sabbath and the analytical minds of the Greeks. The Romans, of course, were the grand disseminators, plastering those planetary names across their vast empire. But now, you finally arrive at the nexus, the very heart of the question that has probably been tickling the back of your mind since this whole journey began. Why 7? Why not 5 or 10 or a glorious, chaotic 13? The answer you'll discover is not singular. It's a beautiful, intricate braid of the very elements we've been exploring. The observable cosmos, the human desire to divine meaning from those observations, and the powerful embrace of religious doctrine. Picture yourself under a clear, inky sky, far from any city lights, the kind of sky that modern pollution often denies us. You look up not with a telescope, but with the naked, hopeful eye of an ancient astrologer. What do you see? The sun, blazing life-giver by day, the moon, a luminous guide by night, and then 5 other bright wanderers: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. These are the 7 classical planets. The word itself comes from the Greek for wanderer, that were visible to the naked eye. They moved across the celestial sphere in ways that were distinct from the fixed stars, weaving patterns that captivated human attention. This observable reality, this cosmic septet, was the first fundamental pillar. It's a mainstream historical fact that cultures across the globe, from Mesopotamia to India, independently recognized and revered these 7 celestial bodies. But mere observation isn't enough to create a week. The human mind, especially in antiquity, craved explanation, desired connection between the vastness above and the minutiae of life below. This is where astrology pirouettes onto the stage. For countless civilizations, these celestial wanderers weren't just lights in the sky. They were powerful deities, or at the very least, potent influences on earthly affairs. Each planet was assigned a specific temperament, a particular domain of influence, and critically, a specific hour of the day to rule. You might think, well, if each hour had a planet, why not an hour-based week? Good question, you clever time traveler. The system that stuck, the one that truly cemented the 7-day cycle, involved the concept of planetary hours. Each of the 24 hours of a day was thought to be ruled by one of the 7 planets, in a fixed, repeating order. The planet that ruled the first hour of a day then gave its name to that day. This wasn't some arbitrary assignment. It was a complex, almost mathematical system. For example, the sun ruled the first hour of Sunday, the moon the first hour of Monday, and so on. This ingenious, albeit now discredited, astrological system provided a logical, if circular, explanation for the naming of the days, giving them a divine patron and a cosmic significance. It's a quirky tidbit to consider how deeply intertwined scientific observation and mystical belief were in shaping our very sense of daily time. And finally, you come to the profound spiritual bedrock of the 7-day cycle, particularly within the Abrahamic traditions. You've already glimpsed the Hebrew concept of the Sabbath, a day of rest and holiness. This wasn't just a practical idea, it was divinely ordained. The narrative of creation in Genesis, where God creates the world in 6 days and rests on the 7th, provided an incredibly powerful, almost unshakable religious imperative for a 7-day week. This narrative resonated across millennia, influencing Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For these faiths, the 7-day cycle wasn't just a convenience. It was a reflection of the divine order, a sacred echo of creation itself. The rhythm of work and rest, the weekly cycle of worship, became deeply embedded in the cultural fabric, particularly as Christianity spread across the Roman Empire and beyond. This religious underpinning provided the emotional and spiritual gravity that held the 7-day structure in place, even as other aspects of life changed dramatically. Historians still argue whether the astrological 7-day week predated the religious 7-day week, or if they co-evolved and mutually reinforced each other. But what's clear is their eventual, undeniable merger. The Romans may have brought the planetary names, but it was the combined might of celestial observation, astrological belief, and potent religious narrative that truly cemented the 7-day week into the pervasive, unquestioned cycle you live by today. You feel it, don't you? That slow, almost imperceptible drag on your eyelids as the week winds down. That subtle shift in the air, a collective exhale across the globe as Friday afternoon creeps in, promising release. You might be slumped in your ergonomic chair, or perhaps curled under a weighted blanket, listening to this. But the magnetic pull of the weekend is universal, a deeply ingrained rhythm in the tapestry of modern life. It's more than just 2 days off. It's a psychological reset, a cultural anchor, a beacon of hope after 5 long days of, well, whatever it is you do. And if you think this yearning for rest is a modern invention, born of cubicle farms and endless Zoom calls, think again. Imagine living in a world where the concept of a guaranteed day off simply didn't exist. No Saturday morning cartoons, no Sunday brunch, no leisurely strolls through a park without the gnawing anxiety of unfinished labor. Frankly, most of you probably wouldn't survive a single week in ancient times without spontaneously combusting from exhaustion, or at least developing a very impressive twitch. The very idea of a designated rest day, a moment to step away from the relentless churn of survival, is profoundly ancient, yet its evolution into the cherished weekend we know is a fascinating journey. We've talked about how the Babylonians gave us the 7-day cycle, how the Hebrews sanctified the Sabbath, and how the Romans infused those days with the names of their powerful gods. But merely having names for days doesn't automatically grant you permission to put your feet up. For millennia, for the vast majority of humanity, life was an unbroken chain of labor, dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the pressing need to simply stay alive. You tilled the fields, you hunted, you gathered, you crafted often from sunup to sundown, with no concept of paid leave or overtime. Your very existence depended on constant vigilance and exertion. Yet even in these harsh realities, faint echoes of planned cessation from labor existed. For the Hebrews, the Sabbath, from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, wasn't just a day of rest. It was a profound spiritual imperative, a weekly covenant with the divine. It wasn't about leisure as we understand it, but about worship, contemplation, and a radical act of trust, trusting that God would provide even if you didn't work. This strict adherence to a weekly rest day, rooted in religious law, became a cornerstone of their identity, and crucially, planted the seed for the idea of collective, mandatory downtime. It was, in many ways, the original "don't even think about checking your work emails" rule, enforced by a higher power. The Romans, ever practical, had their own forms of designated breaks. While they didn't have a regular weekend in our sense, their calendar was punctuated by numerous public holidays and religious festivals, the Feriae. These weren't necessarily days of universal cessation of all labor, but they often involved public games, sacrifices, and a general festive atmosphere where some business might pause. Imagine your boss telling you, "Sorry, no work today, Jupiter's having a party." It certainly sounds more appealing than "sorry, IT system's down again." These days provided a collective pause, a chance to gather, socialize, and re-engage with community life outside the relentless grind of daily toil. Historians still argue whether these Roman feriae truly offered a respite for the masses or were primarily religious obligations for the elite. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, the first day of the week, Sunday, gained prominence. It was the day of Christ's resurrection, becoming the primary day for worship. Initially, this didn't always translate into a day free from all secular work for everyone. Early Christians often worked on Sundays, gathering for worship before or after their labors. However, over centuries, the idea of Sunday as a mandatory day of rest, inspired by the Hebrew Sabbath and reinforced by ecclesiastical decrees, gradually took root across Europe. Emperor Constantine the Great, in 321 AD, even issued a decree stating that judges, city dwellers, and artisans should rest on the venerable day of the sun, though he permitted agricultural work. It was a step, a significant one, towards legalizing a day of rest for a significant portion of the population, even if your ancient Roman farmer was still out there, probably muttering about elite city folk problems. But where did Saturday, that glorious prelude to Sunday, come from? For a long time, the Christian world primarily recognized Sunday as the day of rest and worship. The concept of a two-day weekend is a remarkably modern invention, largely a product of the Industrial Revolution and the rise of organized labor. As factories boomed in the 18th and 19th centuries, workers faced grueling six-day weeks, often with 10 to 16-hour shifts. This wasn't just unpleasant, it was unsustainable, leading to exhaustion, accidents, and social unrest. Think about it. A child working 14 hours a day in a textile mill covered in lint probably wouldn't be too enthusiastic about Monday morning or Tuesday or Wednesday. You get the picture. The push for a shorter workweek gained momentum. Trade unions and social reformers advocated for reduced hours and, crucially, for more than just one day off. One fascinating, albeit somewhat fringe, tidbit in this development is the influence of Jewish factory owners in 19th century America. Many Jewish immigrants, observing the Sabbath from Friday evening to Saturday evening, faced a dilemma. Closing for both the Jewish Sabbath and the Christian Sunday meant losing significant production time. Some innovative, and perhaps shrewd, factory owners began offering their workers Saturday afternoon off, allowing Jewish workers to observe their Sabbath and appealing to other workers who appreciated the extra leisure time. This informal practice, born out of a unique confluence of religious observance and practical economics, slowly gained traction. The mainstream historical fact that truly cemented the modern weekend, however, is often attributed to the Ford Motor Company. In 1926, Henry Ford famously implemented a 5-day, 40-hour workweek for his factory employees, largely out of a belief that rested workers were more productive workers, and also, conveniently, had more leisure time to actually buy Ford cars. This move was revolutionary. At a time when the 6-day week was still standard, Ford's decision was a bold experiment that paid off, demonstrating that a shorter workweek didn't necessarily mean less output, and in fact, could increase efficiency and morale. This pioneering decision helped popularize the concept of Saturday as part of the formal weekend, slowly shifting the industrial norm towards a 2-day break. From ancient sacred days to Roman festivals, and then to the demands of industrial labor and the innovative practices of forward-thinking industrialists, The weekend has taken a long, meandering path to become the beloved institution it is today. It's a testament to humanity's enduring need for respite, for time to recharge, to connect with family and friends, or simply to binge-watch that show everyone's talking about without the looming dread of the alarm clock. Imagine you're living in a world where your weekend, that blissful stretch of freedom you just barely survived last week, and you probably won't survive this one either, let's be honest, simply vanished. Poof. Gone. Not just rescheduled, but structurally obliterated, replaced by something entirely different. You wake up not to a Tuesday, but to a duodie. Your concept of a day of rest, it's now every 10 days, not 7. Your entire rhythmic understanding of time, woven into the very fabric of your society for centuries, is suddenly unraveling, thread by laborious thread. This isn't some dystopian novel, my friend. This was the radical, audacious reality for a brief, bewildering period in revolutionary France. As the late 18th century bled into the tumultuous dawn of the French Revolution, the very air you breathed felt charged with a volatile mixture of hope and terror. The guillotine's thud was a grim counterpoint to the Enlightenment's soaring ideals. Old orders were being systematically dismantled, not just the monarchy and the aristocracy, but every institution, every symbol, every little piece of daily life that reeked of the ancient regime. And what, you might ask, reeked more of the old ways than the calendar itself. That Julian and then Gregorian framework, with its days named after Roman gods and Germanic deities, its weeks culminating in the Christian Sabbath. It was a relic, a remnant, a constant whisper of the past they were so desperately trying to erase. So, on October 24, 1793, a decree was passed, a veritable thunderclap in the annals of timekeeping. The French Republican calendar was officially adopted. This wasn't just a tweak, it was a total ideological overhaul. The aim? To dechristianize society, to strip away all vestiges of monarchical and religious influence, and to replace them with a system based purely on reason, decimalization, and the natural world. It was an ultimate act of defiance, a bold declaration that even time itself would bow to the will of the revolutionary spirit. And you, if you were living through it, would feel this seismic shift right down to your bones. The year would now begin on the autumn equinox, a nod to nature's cycles. Months were renamed with beautiful, evocative titles reflecting the seasons. Vendémiaire, Brumaire, Frimaire for autumn, Nivos, Pluvias, Ventos for winter, Germinal, Floreal, Prairial for spring, and Messidor, Thermidor, Fructidor for summer. Each month had precisely 30 days, divided into 3 10-day periods called decades. And here was the kicker, the point where your daily life would irrevocably alter. The traditional 7-day week was abolished. Gone. Think about it. Instead of your familiar Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you now navigated through primidi, duodi, tridi, quartidi, quintidi, sextidi, septidi, octidi, nonidi, and decadi. And that precious rest day, that weekend you cherished, it was now decadi, the 10th day. So instead of 2 days of rest for 5 days of work, it was 1 day of rest for 9 days of work. Suddenly, that Monday morning feeling wasn't just a feeling. It was a fundamental truth of existence, stretched out into a seemingly endless marathon. You'd probably feel a collective groan ripple across the nation, an exhausted sigh escaping the lips of farmers, artisans, and clerks alike. And to add another layer of radical re-education, instead of saints or Roman gods, the days of the decade were often named after agricultural tools, vegetables, or animals. Imagine telling your boss, "Sorry, I can't make it to the meeting on Wheelbarrow Day." I'm just too swamped on leak day. Or scheduling a romantic dinner for carrot day. It just doesn't have the same ring as Friday night, does it? This wasn't just about logic. It was about embedding revolutionary values into the very rhythm of life, forcing citizens to disconnect from their old beliefs and embrace a new, secular, and agrarian-focused identity. You were meant to think of the soil, of the harvest, of the practicalities of a new republic, not the celestial patrons or the holy days of old. The intention was pure in its revolutionary zeal. It was an attempt to rationalize time, to make it perfectly decimal, to strip away the superstition and the historical baggage. But in practice, you, the ordinary citizen, would find it incredibly disruptive. Sundays, the traditional day of rest and worship, vanished. Church bells fell silent. Markets, once bustling on specific days, lost their rhythm. People struggled to adapt their social lives, their work schedules, their very understanding of when to meet, when to rest, when to pray. The new calendar, rather than liberating, often felt like a straitjacket of inconvenience. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for the 10-day week was purely rationalistic, aiming for decimalization and efficiency, or if it was more ideologically driven, a radical attempt to dechristianize society and erase any lingering symbols of the ancient regime. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a messy intertwining of grand philosophical ideals and ruthless political ambition. But for you, down in the streets, navigating this new temporal landscape, the philosophical debates probably felt distant compared to the ache in your bones from the longer work week. It was the ultimate new year, new me plan, except the me was an entire nation, and the new was wildly inconvenient and largely unpopular. The resistance wasn't violent, not usually. It was passive, stubborn, a quiet refusal to let go of centuries of habit. People continued to observe Sundays, often secretly. They grumbled. They confused the days. Children struggled in schools with the new system. The sheer impracticality of it, coupled with the ingrained human need for the shorter, more frequent 7-day rhythm of work and rest, proved to be its undoing. How do you force a nation to abandon something so deeply woven into their daily lives, their customs, their very souls, for the sake of abstract ideals? You can't, not entirely. The French Republican calendar, for all its revolutionary fervor and grand designs, was short-lived. Napoleon Bonaparte, pragmatic and keenly aware of the need for social stability, finally abolished it on January 1, 1806. You'd likely feel a wave of collective relief washing over you as the familiar 7-day week, with its comforting rhythm and traditional names, slowly trickled back into everyday life. It was a fascinating, radical experiment, a bold declaration that humanity could completely reimagine time. But ultimately, it proved that some rhythms, some patterns, some names for the days of your week were simply too deeply embedded to be easily uprooted. The 7-day cycle, for all its ancient origins in Babylon and its evolution through Rome and Germanic lands, had a staying power that even a revolution couldn't overcome. Imagine for a moment that you wake up this very morning, stretch languidly, and glance at your phone for the time, only to find the date. Well, it's not just wrong, it's fundamentally altered. The calendar on your wall, the digital display on your oven, even the date stamp on your breakfast cereal. All of them speak a new, alien language of time. The familiar rhythm of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday has been replaced by something utterly bizarre, a numerical sequence perhaps, or a cycle of abstract concepts that make no intuitive sense. Your morning coffee tastes just as bitter, the sun rises just as reliably, But the invisible framework of your day, the very scaffold of your plans and expectations, has been declared null and void. It's a disorienting, unsettling sensation, like trying to dance to a song where the beat keeps changing without warning. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this for more than a few days before reverting to good old Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, just for the sheer sanity of it. Because as much as we've seen humanity try to impose its will upon the cosmos, to bend the celestial dance to our own needs, there's an even deeper, more primal resistance, the human aversion to having our ingrained rhythms yanked out from under us. Remember how the French Revolution, in its zeal to scrub away every last vestige of the old order, declared war on the week itself, imposing a 10-day cycle. Well, that didn't stick, did it? It's a testament not just to the endurance of the 7-day week, but to the inherent human resistance to having a perfectly good, if slightly arbitrary, system appended. But the French weren't alone in facing this pushback. You see, when the Gregorian calendar, that super-accurate timekeeper we still use today, began its slow, inevitable march across Europe, it wasn't greeted with universal applause and ticker-tape parades. Quite the contrary. Take Britain, for instance. For centuries, they'd been chugging along happily on the Julian calendar, perfectly content with their slightly inaccurate leap year calculations. But by the mid-18th century, the disparity between the Julian and Gregorian systems had grown to a significant 11 days. When Parliament finally passed the calendar, New Style, Act in 1751, mandating the switch in September 1752, it caused an uproar that would make a modern-day internet outage look like a polite tea party. Imagine the headlines, 11 days stolen from your life. People genuinely believed that 11 days of their existence had simply vanished into the ether. Riots erupted in some towns, with shouts of "Give us back our 11 days," echoing through the streets. Farmers worried about their harvest cycles being disrupted. Tenants fretted over rent payments due on dates that no longer existed, and many simply felt a profound sense of temporal theft. It's hard enough to get you to embrace a new coffee shop, let alone a whole new way of experiencing time. This wasn't just about astronomical precision. It was about the profound psychological and social embeddedness of the old calendar. It demonstrated, in vivid street-level detail, that you don't just change the numbers on a calendar. You alter the very fabric of people's lives, their habits, their expectations, and yes, their deep-seated superstitions. Now that was resistance to adopting a new, more accurate calendar. But what about societies that actively tried to reinvent the week, not just tweak it? Fast forward to the early 20th century, to the revolutionary fervor of the Soviet Union. Here, the traditional 7-day week, with its Judeo-Christian echoes and leisurely Sunday, was deemed inefficient and bourgeois. So in 1929, they introduced the uninterrupted production week, or Neperivka. You might think, oh, a 4-day work week sounds great. Well, not quite. The week was now 5 days long, with 4 working days and 1 day off. The catch: your day off wasn't everyone else's day off. Workers were divided into 5 groups, each assigned a different color, and your rest day rotated with your color. This meant factories could operate continuously, theoretically boosting productivity, but it utterly destroyed the concept of a communal weekend. Families often had different days off. Social gatherings became logistical nightmares, and the very idea of a shared day of rest, remember how much you cherish your own lazy Saturday mornings, simply evaporated. It was like living in a constant state of mild jet lag, never quite in sync with anyone else. The initial enthusiasm for this relentless march of progress quickly waned, replaced by widespread grumbling and a longing for the old system. The Soviet government tried again in 1931, introducing a 6-day week, with Sunday now designated as a universal day off, alongside a rotating 6th day. But even this couldn't entirely erase the collective memory of the 7-day cycle. You see, the resistance wasn't just ideological. It was deeply practical and social. How do you plan a picnic with friends if their day off changes every week? How do you attend religious services if the traditional holy day is no longer guaranteed? The human need for communal rhythm, for shared moments of rest and celebration, proved more powerful than any top-down decree. By 1940, the traditional 7-day week with its precious universal Sunday was officially reinstated in the USSR, a quiet admission that some traditions, once woven into the societal tapestry, are incredibly difficult to unpick. And it wasn't just grand, state-mandated overhauls that saw resistance or quirky adaptations. Throughout history, various fringe groups, often driven by unique religious or philosophical beliefs, have developed and adhered to their own calendar systems, sometimes in direct defiance of the dominant societal standard. Think of small religious sects, tucked away in remote corners of the world, meticulously observing a lunar calendar that differs by weeks, sometimes months, from the Gregorian one. Or consider the various perpetual calendar movements, which periodically pop up, proposing a calendar that never changes its dates for a given day of the week, aiming for ultimate regularity. They envision a world where Christmas always falls on a Tuesday, for example. While intellectually fascinating, these proposals invariably run into the brick wall of ingrained habits and the sheer upheaval required for a global shift. Historians still debate the true extent to which economic motivations, rather than purely religious or scientific ones, fueled the widespread resistance to calendar reforms in certain periods. Was it genuinely about lost days, or was it also about the disruption of markets, contracts, and established work patterns? The truth, as always, is likely a complex tapestry of all these factors. But what's clear is that the calendar, far from being a mere tool for tracking time, is a profound cultural artifact, steeped in tradition, belief, and practical necessity. To challenge it, to even subtly adapt it, is to tug at the very threads that bind a society together. You can try to tell a fish to fly, or a cat to fetch, but good luck telling humanity that its Tuesday is now a day of glorious production, and its cherished weekend is nothing but a staggered, lonely myth. The 7-day week, with its planetary patrons and shared days of rest, has truly earned its place through centuries of both adoption and, fascinatingly, through the very resistance it has weathered. Days structuring daily life. Reflect on how deeply embedded named days became in organizing commerce, religion, and the very fabric of society. Imagine, if you will, stirring from your slumber right now, the first sliver of dawn peeking through your curtains, and an unsettling blankness descends as you try to recall what day is it. Not just is it Monday or Tuesday, but a profound, existential void where the very concept of a named day has vanished. No Tuesday for your team meeting, no Friday for pizza night, no Sunday for that inexplicable urge to clean out the junk drawer. Your internal clock, once so finely tuned to the rhythmic pulse of the week, would stutter and flatline, leaving you adrift in an amorphous sea of undifferentiated time. And let's be brutally honest, without Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on, your modern life, with its endless array of appointments, deadlines, and reply-all emails, would frankly implode faster than a souffle in a mosh pit. You probably wouldn't survive the week. You see, what began as celestial observation and religious decree. Remember how those ancient Babylonians looked to the heavens, assigning deities to their newfangled 7-day cycle. Evolved into the invisible scaffolding upon which entire civilizations were built. These named divisions of time didn't just tell you when things happened. They dictated what things happened. Suddenly, the very rhythm of commerce, the solemnity of worship, and the intricate dance of daily societal interactions became intrinsically interwoven with the names we utter without a second thought. Consider the bustling marketplaces of medieval Europe, where the designated market day became the beating heart of local economies. Picture the cacophony of vendors hawking their wares, farmers bringing in their freshest produce, and artisans displaying their crafts, all converging on a specific, agreed-upon day, perhaps Tuesday, perhaps Saturday, because everyone knew unequivocally that this was the day for trade. Before the advent of widely accessible clocks or even standardized hours, the named day was the ultimate appointment setter. Merchants would plan their journeys, knowing that only on a certain day would they find the most buyers or sellers. Debts were settled, contracts signed, and goods exchanged, all regulated by the predictable cycle of named days. A mainstream historical fact you might find amusing is that in many historical contexts, market days were not just about buying and selling. They were also the primary locus for community news, legal announcements, and even public punishments. If you missed market day, you might miss a lot more than just a good deal on some artisanal cheese. This wasn't merely convenience. It was the bedrock of a functioning economy, fostering trust and predictability in transactions that spanned vast distances and diverse communities. Then, there's the profound impact on religion. From the Hebrew Sabbath, a day of sacred rest and spiritual reflection, to the Christian observance of Sunday for worship, and the Muslim Jummah prayers on Friday, the named week became the very armature of spiritual life. Religious calendars dictated not only regular worship, but also fasting days, feast days, and penitential seasons, all meticulously pegged to specific named days within the week or the larger year. These religious rhythms weren't confined to individual homes or places of worship. They permeated society, influencing everything from when courts were in session to when public works projects paused. The solemn tolling of church bells on a Sunday morning wasn't just a call to prayer. It was an audible marker of the day itself, a sonic reminder to everyone within earshot that a new week, with its unique set of expectations and traditions, had begun. And how about the quirky tidbit of the dies fasti and dies nefasti of ancient Rome, which, while not strictly tied to our modern named days in the same way, represented a fascinating precursor to how certain days acquired specific societal functions. These were days when legal or public business could or could not be conducted. Imagine trying to file a lawsuit only to be told, "Sorry, friend, today's a dies nefastis. The courts are closed for cosmic reasons. Come back tomorrow, or maybe the day after that." It wasn't about a planetary deity, but about a deep, ingrained belief that the very fabric of time itself held certain permissions and prohibitions, influencing everything from commerce to civic life. This intricate interplay between the practical and the superstitious demonstrated just how profoundly humans intertwined daily existence with abstract temporal divisions. The named week, therefore, became the invisible thread weaving together the disparate elements of human existence. Education systems adopted it, with school days and holidays structured around the weekly cycle. Judicial systems relied on it, with court dockets meticulously planned for specific days. Social life, too, revolved around it. You'd visit family on a specific day, attend a public festival, or gather with friends, all orchestrated by the named segments of time. Mondays became synonymous with the dreaded return to toil, a feeling that, let's be honest, hasn't changed much in millennia. Fridays with the sweet anticipation of respite, and the weekend with a collective sigh of relief. It's a collective hallucination, really, but one we all agree upon, making it wonderfully, terrifyingly real. And here's where historians still argue whether the practical demands of burgeoning commercial networks or the pervasive influence of religious dogma played the more dominant role in solidifying the named 7-day week as the global standard. Was it the merchant, desperate for a reliable market schedule, or the priest, guiding a congregation through a fixed cycle of worship, who ultimately cemented Tuesday as Tuesday and Sunday as Sunday in the minds of the masses? The truth, as always, is probably a complex tapestry woven from both threads, each reinforcing the other until the named days became so deeply embedded, so utterly indispensable, that their absence would render society functionally mute. We might have rebelled against the French Revolution's 10-day flop, or quirkily adapted calendars like some societies we've discussed, but the core idea of named, repeating days, that's one habit humanity just couldn't kick. You find yourself in this quiet moment, peering not into the distant past, but into the shimmering, almost unknowable future. You're holding, perhaps, one of those sleek, translucent time management devices that future you will undoubtedly possess, and as your finger glides across the holographic interface, you pause. You see Monday. You see Tuesday. The familiar constellation of names, unwavering, almost ancient even in this imagined tomorrow. Will they always be there, these echoes of Roman gods and Norse deities, these whispers of planetary patrons? Or will the ceaseless churn of progress, the relentless march of human ingenuity, finally arrive at a point where even the very names we ascribe to our days are deemed inefficient? It's a curious thought, isn't it? To consider the obsolescence of something so utterly woven into the fabric of your daily existence. You plan your week around them, you curse them, you celebrate them. They are the scaffolding of your very schedule, the dependable signposts in your journey through life. And yet, the idea of fundamentally altering something as ingrained as our weekly rhythm. Let's be real. You'd probably have an easier time convincing a particularly stubborn houseplant to do your taxes. The sheer inertia of custom, the profound depth to which these names have sunk into the collective subconscious, makes any radical shift feel less like evolution and more like attempting to reroute a river with a teacup. Consider the sheer weight of global commerce and communication that relies on these shared signifiers. Imagine the chaos, the delightful, soul-crushing administrative nightmare if half the world decided to embrace a 10-day week. Remember that French Revolution flop, while the other half clung to the 7-day standard. Your global conference call schedule would become a logic puzzle designed by a particularly mischievous cosmic entity. The ISO 8601 standard, which dictates how dates and times should be numerically represented worldwide, implicitly builds upon the foundation of our 7-day week, a testament to its pervasive global acceptance. It's not just a quaint tradition, it's the very backbone of modern interconnectedness. But let's entertain the wilder possibilities for a moment. Could something entirely new challenge our traditional naming conventions? What if humanity truly became an interplanetary species, and Martian days, significantly longer than Earth's, demanded their own unique temporal framework? Would a Sol day replace Tuesday for our intrepid Martian colonists? Or would the sheer logistical headaches of managing two different temporal systems eventually force a radical reevaluation, perhaps leading to a purely numerical, universal day count, devoid of names? You'd lose a certain poetic charm, wouldn't you? Imagine waking up and saying, "Another beautiful 47,892nd day of the current era." Not quite as catchy as Good Morning Wednesday. There's a mainstream historical fact here that really underscores the challenge. Despite countless proposals for calendar reform throughout history, from the positivist calendar to various attempts at fixed calendars that would align dates and days perfectly each year, none have ever successfully dislodged the Gregorian calendar and its 7-day week from global prominence. The reason is often less about inherent superiority and more about the immense social, religious, and economic disruption such a change would entail. It's the ultimate, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, scenario, even if on a philosophical level one could argue our week is a bit arbitrary. And for a quirky tidbit, did you know there have been serious proposals for world calendars that include a blank day or leap week, inserted annually outside the regular named cycle, specifically to keep the calendar consistent year after year? These days or weeks wouldn't have names, or would be named something like World Day, effectively pausing the normal weekly progression. Imagine the existential dread of a nameless Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? Or is it the void? Thankfully, none of these ever truly gain traction. The sheer disruption to religious observances alone, especially the Sabbath, which must fall on a specific day, has historically torpedoed most such proposals. Historians and sociologists still debate whether the enduring power of our named days is primarily a product of religious tradition, astronomical observation, or simply the immense inertia of established cultural practice. Some argue that the 7-day cycle feels natural because it aligns roughly with lunar phases, even if imperfectly. Others contend it's purely a construct, a convenient division that became self-perpetuating through sheer habit. This open scholarly debate speaks to the deep psychological roots of our relationship with time itself. Are we tied to the planets by names, or simply to the comforting rhythm they provide? Perhaps the greatest challenger to our named days won't be a new calendar, but a blurring of their significance. In a truly automated, hyper-connected world where work and leisure might merge, where global teams operate across time zones without a traditional weekend, will the names still hold the same meaning? Will the distinction between workday and rest day become so fluid that the labels themselves feel quaint, almost ceremonial? You already see it in the gig economy, don't you? Your Monday might look suspiciously like someone else's Saturday, depending on your schedule. It's a gentle joke on the universe that we spent millennia naming these divisions, only for technology to occasionally make them irrelevant to your personal flow. Yet even then, you still know it's Monday, even if you're playing video games in your pajamas. So, will our ancient day names persist indefinitely? It's difficult to imagine a force powerful enough, or a benefit compelling enough, to truly unseat them globally. The sheer inconvenience of changing them, the deep cultural roots they possess, and the almost comforting familiarity they offer, suggest a longevity that might outlast many other human innovations. They are, in a strange way, a living museum of our shared history. a daily reminder of the gods and planets and cosmic curiosities that shaped our ancestors' understanding of their place in the universe. They whisper stories of ancient Rome, of Norse sagas, of Babylonian stargazers, all simply by announcing the current day. As the quiet settles around you, the thought of these ancient names, these echoes of time, lingering on into untold futures, brings a gentle sense of continuity. The very air around you feels softer, the edges of your thoughts blurring just a little. You've journeyed through the vast expanse of time, from humanity's first bewildered gaze at the stars to the structured rhythm of your own week. You've seen how abstract concepts of time became woven into the very fabric of your days, given names, given personalities, given meaning. And now, as the last vestiges of the day fade into the silent embrace of night, you can almost feel the gentle pulse of those ancient rhythms still within you. The turning of the earth, the quiet dance of the celestial bodies, the slow, steady breath of history itself. Let the day names, whatever their future, continue to mark your passage through life, guiding you, comforting you, providing that steady, dependable beat. There's a quiet reassurance in knowing that, even as the world rushes forward, some things, some very old and very human things, remain. The journey through time is a vast and wondrous one, and you've been an exceptional companion. Close your eyes, let the stories of the past drift into the dreams of the present. Feel the stillness, feel the peace, sweet dreams.